Chapter 154. Besides Ling Han who'd charged over, gone Wu Wei Yili Nan Kaming, and Bai Zhe had stood up as well. The Divine Union Realm. All 5 of them had attained the Divine Union Realm. In next to no time, Bai Zhe and the others charged towards the nearby gray-clothed man and young man. At this moment, Bai Zhe and the others had extremely ferocious expressions on their faces. Because they were actually aware of everything that had occurred just now. When they saw Yi Xian being besieged to such a state, it felt like their hearts were being torn apart by blades. However, they had no other choice. They had to charge into the Divine Union Realm. Because only at the Divine Union Realm could they fight the gray-clothed man and the others. Otherwise, they would only be giving their lives away. 5 against 3. The gray-clothed man and the others were formidable indeed. Even if it was 3 against 5, they actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. After all, they were the most monstrous geniuses of the Central Divine Prefecture's younger generation. Not far away, Yi Xian sat on the ground. He seemed to be a little uncomfortable, so he simply lay on the ground, took out a golden sore pill and swallowed it. He was exhausted. The battle from before was truly too exhausting. He was truly exhausted, because he'd severely overexerted his body. Coupled with the injuries he'd sustained, his body could be said to be on the verge of collapse. At this moment he didn't even want to move a finger. Right at this moment, a black shadow suddenly assaulted him from the side at an extremely swift speed. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly flashed past behind Yi Xian. This figure was even swifter. Bang! Along with an explosion, an afterimage retreated repeatedly, and it didn't take long for the afterimage to retreat into the darkness. Meanwhile, a man was standing by Yi Xian's side. Mo Yunqi. Mo Yunqi gazed coldly at the darkness in the distance, and he held a golden throwing knife in his palm. Meanwhile, a few more men arrived by Yi Xian's side. At this moment, all the members of the bandit mercenary group had attained the Divine Union Realm, and not a single one of them had failed. Mo Yunqi and the other members of the bandit mercenary group stood on guard by Yi Xian's side. Yi Xian felt extremely exhausted, and he wanted to sleep. This time he didn't force himself to stay awake because Mo Yunqi and the others were by his side. He was at ease. Soon he fell asleep. Mo Yunqi and the others stood guard beside Yi Xian. They stared at the darkness around them, their eyes filled with cold killing intent. Not far away. Bang! With a muffled sound, a figure was directly sent flying. This figure was the middle-aged man who was fighting Lu Banzwang. This time, the middle-aged man flew more than 100 feet, and as soon as he stopped, Lu Banzwang appeared in front of him again. In the blink of an eye, Lu Banzwang leaped into the air and slammed her palm down. When her palm landed, her entire palm became illusory. The palm had not yet arrived, but the momentum had arrived first. The ground beneath the middle-aged man's feet turned to dust. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted abruptly when he sensed the might of this palm strike. He squatted down in a half-squat, crossed his arms and blocked it in front of him. The profound energy within his body surged into his arms like tide water. The palm fell. Bang! The middle-aged man's feet sank into the ground, and his arms were torn apart. At this moment, Lu Banzwang landed on the ground and raised his knee to the middle-aged man's chin. Bang! The middle-aged man's throat instantly shattered and fresh blood sprayed. Lu Banzwang gestured with her right hand, and the spatial ring on the middle-aged man's finger flew into her grasp. A wisp of an arc arose on the corners of her mouth when she glanced at its contents. After she put it away, Lu Banzwang gazed at Lian Zhan who was fighting the woman in green clothes nearby. In the next moment she suddenly vanished on the spot. Over 30 m away, Lian Zhan who was fighting the woman in green clothes suddenly turned around and punched. Bang! Lian Zhan retreated a few dozen steps. Lu Banzwang appeared by the woman's side. She glanced at Lian Zhan in the distance and was just about to attack when a voice suddenly resounded from the darkness in the distance. Retreat! Retreat! Lian Zhan pondered deeply for a moment, and then he turned around with the intention of leaving. Meanwhile, Lu Banzwang and the woman in green clothes suddenly vanished on the spot. Lian Zhan's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he suddenly raised his hands. In an instant, 2 balls of strange black gas suddenly condensed on his palms. In the blink of an eye, a wisp of a ferocious smile arose on the corners of his mouth, and then he suddenly slapped his palms forward. The 2 balls of black gas shook violently before they exploded apart. Bang! Lu Banzwang and the woman in green clothes directly retreated to their original positions, and in front of them floated 2 balls of strange black gas. There was a trace of seriousness in the 2 women's eyes because they felt danger. However, the two of them did not have the slightest fear, and in the blink of an eye, they once again disappeared on the spot. In the distance, Lien Zhan's eyes narrowed slightly. He stretched out his right hand and then suddenly clenched it. Break! His voice fell. In the distance, the two balls of black gas exploded with a loud bang. When Lu Banzwang and the woman in green clothes swept away the black gas, Lien Zhan had already disappeared, and on the other side, the man in gray clothes and the others had also disappeared. Lu Banzwang and the woman in green clothes rushed forward, but in the next moment, the two women suddenly stopped. The two women looked at each other and it was unknown what they felt, but there was a trace of shock in their eyes. Ling Han and the others came to the two women's side, and Ling Han said in a low voice, "Do we chase?" The two women shook their heads at the same time. Ling Han still wanted to say something, but Lu Banzwang looked at Yi Xian who was lying on the ground not far away. Wait for him to recover. Hearing this, Ling Han nodded, and then came to Yi Xian's side with Gan Wuwei and the others. They did not wake Yi Xian and instead stood around Yi Xian just like that. In the distance, the woman in green clothes said in a low voice, "This matter is not simple." Lu Banzwang fell silent. The woman in green clothes looked at Lu Banzwang, her expression quite serious. That aura. The Middle Divine Continent's Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm are not risking their lives, but risking their lives. Even if he has a sword immortal behind him, he cannot afford to play with them. Those two forces have existed in the Middle Divine Continent for thousands of years, and their resources are very deep. They are not something that a sword immortal can easily contend with. Moreover, they have come looking for him. You should know very well yourself. Lu Banzwang did not speak. The woman in green clothes frowned. Are you really going to continue getting involved in this mess? Lu Banzwang still did not speak. The woman in green clothes said slightly angrily, "How long have you known him? Do you really want to leave your life in Azure Province? And the Lu clan, even if you don't think for yourself, you should at least think for the Lu clan, right? If they are dragged into this, do you think it is a good thing for the Lu clan?" Lu Banzwang shook his head slightly and then walked in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian who was lying in front of him, expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Beside him, the woman in green clothes was so angry that she suddenly stomped on the ground. Everyone was dumbfounded by this sight. In next to no time, the horizon was suffused with a smear of dawn. The sky was bright. Meanwhile, Yi Xian still did not wake up. It was not until noon that he slowly opened his eyes. When he saw that Ling Han and the others were still there, he grinned. "You're all here." Ling Han and the others also smiled. It was good that he was fine. Yi Xian slowly stood up. He glanced at Ling Han and the others. At this moment, Ling Han and the others were already in the Divine Unity tier. Seeing that his brothers had all reached the Divine Unity tier, he was naturally happy. As for himself, he could actually start searching for spirit swords. However, he could only devour clear grade swords now. A sword at the level of a superb spiritual sword would definitely not have a good effect on him. As for clear grade swords, they were worth at least hundreds of millions of gold coins, and they were the kind that had a price but no supply. Poor. Yi Xian sighed in his heart. He was not just poor. At this moment, the fifth-floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn appeared not far from Yi Xian and the others. The fifth-floor master glanced at Yi Xian and wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian said softly, "Senior, do you have something to say?" The fifth-floor master nodded, and his expression was rather unnatural. "Young friend, just now, the Drunken Immortal Inn suddenly recalled the Dao soldiers that had rushed over. Something might have happened." Hearing this, Yi Xian frowned. "Do you know the reason?" The fifth-floor master shook his head. "I don't know the specific reason, but there must have been two voices at the headquarters. If I'm not wrong, it should be Karaki Academy and Dark Realm doing something." Yi Xian's frown deepened. The Drunken Immortal Inn had always been supporting him, but now there were two voices within the Drunken Immortal Inn. What exactly did Karaki Academy and Dark Realm do? The fifth-floor master said in a low voice, "Young friend, don't worry. The Drunken Immortal Inn has already decided to support you, and it will absolutely not change its mind under normal circumstances. I'll get to the bottom of this matter as soon as possible." Yi Xian nodded. "All right. There's one more thing. I hope that Senior can help me find a sword. It would be best if it's a clear grade sword, just one will do." His current wealth was only enough to buy one, and he truly couldn't afford any more. Even though he had quite a bit of money, his expenses were quite high as well. Especially for Zhonglan Academy. Zhonglan Academy hadn't completely gotten on the right track, and it had no source of income. If he couldn't produce the money, then the students of Zhonglan Academy would probably have to starve. A clear grade sword. The fifth-floor master thought for a moment and said, "All right, I'll immediately notify the headquarters and the Azure Prefecture's Kuraki Academy to find a clear-grade sword for you as soon as possible." He paused slightly at this point and then he continued, "Her Highness has already rushed to the southern border of the state of Jiang. However, the soldiers she brought over will probably be unable to resist the state of Yu and the state of Chu because the Great Cloud Empire is definitely supporting those two states. Young friend, it's best for you to hurry to the southern border immediately so that nothing happens to the ninth princess." The Great Cloud Empire, Yi Xian said in a low voice. "Has the Great Cloud Empire sent troops over?" The fifth-floor master replied, "I don't know for now. However, you must be careful. The Great Cloud Empire has a history of almost 3,000 years in Azure Prefecture, and its resources are so deep that they aren't inferior to some powers in the Central Divine region at all." Yi Xian nodded. He fell silent for a moment, and then he looked at Ling Yu and the others. "Do you need to rest?" All of them shook their heads. Yi Xian looked at Lu Banzwang and Lu Banzwang whistled. Soon, a dozen black wolves rushed out of Two Realm City and stopped in front of Yi Xian and the others. Yi Xian and the others leaped onto the backs of the wolves. Yi Xian faced the fifth-floor master. "Senior, there are 30 demonic beasts in the city. Please bring them to the Azure Tide Academy." The fifth-floor master nodded. "All right." Yi Xian then turned to Bai Zhe, who was not far away. "Go back with Senior. Remember to restrain these demonic beasts and the students of the academy. If anyone dares to cause trouble for me, I'll come back and break their legs." With that, he led the others and rushed out. In the blink of an eye, the group disappeared into the distance. Ling Yu also followed, but the green-robed woman did not. Looking at Yi Xian and the others in the distance, the green-robed woman sighed softly. "The so-called Brotherhood will kill you?" Not far away, Bai Zhe looked coldly at the green-robed woman. "I can die for Bandit Yi and the others at any time. What is Brotherhood? If we can't live and die together, how can we call each other brothers?" With that, he turned and left. Chapter 155. Brothers? The green-robed woman was expressionless and said nothing. She naturally knew what brotherly love was because she also had friends such as Lu Banzwang. If not for Lu Banzwang, she would not have rushed here from the Central Divine Continent. However, brotherly love was not the only thing in this world. The green-robed woman raised her head and looked into the distance, a complicated look in her eyes. She was naturally worried for Lu Banzwang, because she realized that this matter was no longer just a battle between the younger generation. In the Central Divine Continent, the battles between the younger generation would be controlled within a certain range, or they would not interfere, allowing the younger generation to fight and charge their own way. But now, Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm were not being controlled, and not only were they not being controlled but they were also trying to kill each other. This was not targeted at Yi Xian. This was targeted at Yi Xian and his disciple. This was no longer a battle but a battle to the death. A battle to the death between two great forces was relatively rare in the Central Divine Continent, because the implications were too great. It had to be known that forces of this level would definitely have allies, and once a battle to the death, it was very likely that several forces would be involved. And Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm had existed in the Central Divine Continent for thousands of years, so how deep their foundations were. Once such forces fought to the death, how terrifying would it be? Could a single sword immortal stop them? Even two sword immortals might not be able to. After all, being a sword immortal did not mean being invincible. The green-robed woman sighed softly and then followed them. She was not doing this for Yi Xian but for Lu Banzwang. Since persuasion was useless, she could only help. On a plain, Yi Xian and the others were sprinting. Although Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang had not reached the divine combination tier, their strength could be said to have far surpassed it. Reinforcements. The southern side of the Jiang nation had already fallen, and the Great Cloud Empire was definitely involved. Under such circumstances, even if Jiang Jiao went, he would not be of much use. He had to reach Jiang Jiao's side as soon as possible. And now, Ling Han and the others were already at the divine reunion tier, and added with their top-grade equipment. If the 11 of them entered the battlefield, they would be like a sharp sword that could pierce a bloody path through tens of thousands of soldiers. Ning Nation. Tuoba Yen stood on a city wall. She wore a tight-fitting dragon robe with her right hand behind her back. Her long hair draped over her shoulders as she looked ahead. At this time, an old woman appeared by her side. The old lady bowed slightly to Tuoba Yen. "Your Majesty, we found out that Great Cloud Empire has indeed made a move. There are soldiers of Great Cloud Empire in the armies of Chu and Yu." Tuoba Yen narrowed his eyes. "Is it the Black Flame Army?" The old woman shook her head. I'm not sure. Tuoba Yin slowly closed his eyes. Have the golden guards and the shadows get ready. The old woman looked up at Tuoba Yin and said in shock, Your Majesty. Tuoba Yin opened her eyes and looked at the distant horizon. A moment later she softly said, Without the lips, the teeth will be cold. Country of Jiang, drunken immortal inn. In the room, the 5th floor master sat beside him. In front of him was the 8th floor master. Other than them there was also an old man. The old man sat in the main seat. This person was the 4th floor master of the drunken immortal restaurant who had rushed over from the headquarters. An expert above the 10,000 laws realm. On the 4th floor, he took a sip of tea and said softly, We should stop now. Stop now. The 5th floor master frowned. Is this the headquarters decision? The 4th floor master nodded. It's the decision of everyone. The 5th floor master shook his head. I don't understand. Our drunken immortal inn has been supporting little friend Yi Xian since the beginning, and we've offended drunken immortal inn and Karaki Academy because of this. If we stop now, the gains don't make up for the losses. The 8th floor master also nodded. Indeed. Since we've already supported him, why not do it to the end? The 4th floor master glanced at the two of them. You might not know this, but this time Karaki Academy and Dark World have applied for the life and death writ from the Guardians. The Tao Protectors have already agreed. The life and death writ. Hearing this, the 8th floor master and 5th floor master's expressions changed. In the Divine Central Continent, two factions could not casually start a war. It was possible to start a war, but they had to apply for the life and death writ. Once they applied for the life and death writ, it would be a fight to the death. To put it bluntly, Karaki Academy and Dark World could start an all-out war at any time. In the past they could not start an all-out war at will, but now they could suddenly attack any faction. This was no longer a matter that concerned the younger generation. The 4th floor master said softly, They aren't just targeting Yi Xian this time, and they're targeting that sword immortal who stands behind him as well. If our drunken immortal and intends to continue participating, then we must prepare for an all-out war. If we really fight to the death, then our drunken immortal and will have no advantage at all, and we can't do that. The 5th floor master and 8th floor master fell silent when they heard this. An all-out war. To put it in simpler terms, if they were to fight now, then it wouldn't just be those below the Dharma realm. All of them might have to participate in the war, and it was even to the extent that experts above the Dharma realm might have to participate as well. If they fought like that, then many would die. The drunken immortal and didn't want to fight like that because the losses would be too great. A short while later, the 4th floor master sighed lightly. Pulling one hair will affect everything. The drunken immortal and can't fight like that. Because once we do, then it won't just be a severe injury, it's very likely that we'll lose our lives. Of course, we should help him if it's within our ability. For example, if he needs to buy something, sell something, or even provide information. However, we can't send our forces to fight the Dark Dimension and Karaki Academy head-on. When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at the 5th floor master and said, Once we're done here, return to the Central Divine Prefecture with me and focus on breaking through to the Dharma realm. The 5th floor master fell silent for a short while before he said, He needs a light-rank sword. The 4th floor master nodded slightly. All right, I'll immediately send someone to search for one for him. As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and walked towards the outside. But when he arrived at the door, he stopped once more. Remember, don't mix it with too much personal feelings. All of you represent the immortal indulgence inn, and the slightest bit of carelessness will bring calamity to our inn. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished through the door. In the room, the 5th floor master smiled bitterly. The 8th floor master spoke softly, That's all that my drunken immortal inn can do. The 5th floor master nodded, I naturally understand. Alas, I just never imagined that the Dark Dimension and Karaki Academy would actually be so determined. The 8th floor master said, Yi Xian is truly too much of a monstrous genius. Most importantly, he has a sword immortal backing him. The Dark Dimension and Karaki Academy are too fearful of him, and they don't dare to allow Yi Xian to grow at all. Moreover, their actions are equivalent to cutting off all other paths of escape for Yi Xian. The 5th floor master gazed at the 8th floor master, and the latter spoke softly, There's probably another reason why the Dark Dimension and Karaki Academy are so resolute, and it's because they're afraid that Yi Xian will head to the Central Divine Prefecture and join another power like the Azure Wave Academy. If Yi Xian really joins a power at that time, then Karaki Academy wouldn't just be targeting a sword immortal. But now that Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension have made their stand clear, those powers in the Central Divine Prefecture will naturally not accept Yi Xian at a time like this. The fifth-floor master sighed softly. Not to mention the other powers, even the pavilion of drunken immortals wouldn't dare protect Yi Xian. Because if they did, then they would have to be prepared to fight to the death with Karaki Academy in the Dark Dimension. A short while later, the fifth-floor master stood up. I'll help as much as I can. With that, he turned around and vanished on the spot. At the southern border of the state of Jiang, Mizar City, Jiang Jiao stood on the city wall and gazed ahead. There was a dense mass of cavalry at the end of the horizon. The Chu Kingdom's cavalry. There were over 100,000 of them. It could be said that the Chu Kingdom's cavalry had been mobilized. Besides that, there were some infantrymen around the cavalry. They were the infantry that would attack the city. There were around 100,000 soldiers in Mizar City as well, and they were waiting to be attacked. Naturally, they had many advantages. However, the expressions of everyone on the city wall were extremely solemn. Because the experts of the Great Cloud Empire of Azure Prefecture might be hidden amongst the cavalry in the distance. The Great Cloud Empire. The supreme overlord of Azure Prefecture. The most terrifying thing was that the Empire had a mysterious and formidable army, the Black Flame Army. That army of less than 100 had destroyed an entire empire. How terrifying was that? Everyone was afraid of the Great Cloud Empire. But now, everyone in the state of Jiang had no choice but to fight. If they didn't fight, they would be beaten to death. Jiang Jiao suddenly turned to look at a deputy general beside her. How's the situation in the east? The deputy general said in a deep voice, Old Marshal Lin Xiao has defended the area, but the situation is not good. There are some Divine Unity Realm experts among the Yu Kingdom soldiers, and there are quite a number of them. These people are extremely powerful and ordinary soldiers can't stop them. After Marshal Pei Xiao who rushed over, the situation improved a little, but he only dares to defend and doesn't dare to attack. It's very passive. Jiang Jiao nodded slightly, understood. At this moment, the cavalry in the distance suddenly moved. Everyone on the city wall quickly raised their heads. In front of the Chu Kingdom's cavalry was a group of infantry sieging the city. There were about 20,000 of them and there were thousands of them. These people were not soldiers but civilians. The civilians of the state of Jiang. Among them there were old people, women and children. Seeing this scene, Jiang Jiao's expression instantly turned ugly. At this moment, the soldiers on the city wall also had extremely ugly expressions. Soon, the Chu Kingdom soldiers forced the civilians to approach the city. When the civilians saw the soldiers of Jiang Kingdom, they immediately ran towards the city as if they had gone mad. Without a doubt, this was their last straw to clutch at. When they saw this scene, the soldiers on the city wall looked at Jiang Jiao. The civilians were getting closer and closer, and behind them were the Chu Kingdom's sieging soldiers. Once the civilians got close, the sieging soldiers would seize the opportunity to break through the city gate. At that time, countless people in Mizar City would die. Not only Mizar City, but the Chu Kingdom's cavalry could even go all the way south to the imperial capital of Jiang Kingdom. The civilians were getting closer and closer to the Chu Kingdom soldiers. At this moment, Jiang Jiao suddenly took a step forward with an expressionless face. Release the arrows. Chapter 156. Release the arrows. When she shouted these two words, Jiang Jiao was still expressionless. Acting on her emotions? How could she act on her emotions? If the Chu soldiers broke into the city, countless soldiers in the city would die. Not only would the soldiers die, but the citizens in the city would also fall under the butcher knives of the Chu soldiers. More people would die. She had to be responsible for more people. Although it was cruel, she had no other choice. She had no other choice. Jiang Jiao stared at the Chu soldiers below. Her eyes were bloodshot and emotionless. On the city wall, the soldiers looked at the citizens of the Jiang country. They could not bear to see them. These were the citizens of the Jiang country. However, they had no choice but to act. Helplessness. Deep helplessness. Just as the soldiers on the city wall were about to act, a deputy general beside Jiang Jiao suddenly pointed to the right. Marshal, look. Jiang Jiao turned to look to the right. There, 12 people riding black wolves were charging over. Yi Xian. Seeing that it was Yi Xian, the people on the city wall were in an uproar. State Scholar Yi. Someone suddenly shouted angrily. Very quickly, voices resounded from the city wall. State Scholar Yi. The sound of the city wall and the shouts pierced through the clouds. The moment she saw Yi Xian, Jiang Jiao's expression instantly relaxed. Her tightly clenched fists loosened, and fresh blood dripped from her palms. In the distance, Yi Xian and the others were riding the big black wolves towards the Chu soldiers attacking the city. 10 Divine Union Realm experts in addition to Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang who far surpassed the Divine Union Realm. How terrifying was the aura of Yi Xian's group. Although there were only 12 of them, their aura was not inferior to a small army. Yi Xian's group was extremely fast. In a short period of time, they had already charged in front of the group of soldiers. The cavalry behind the Chu soldiers did not even have time to react. This was because Yi Xian's group was simply too fast. Kill! The leader Yi Xian roared angrily. A sword flew out from Yi Xian's body. The spirit-elegant sword was like a bolt of lightning as it pierced through the distance. In an instant more than 10 heads flew. Kill! Behind Yi Xian, Ling Han and the others roared in anger. Unstoppable. When Yi Xian and the others rushed into the group of soldiers, they immediately started a massacre. Those soldiers were simply not their opponents. Of course, because they didn't react in time and didn't organize well, Yi Xian and the others were caught unprepared. At this moment, Jiang Jiu, who was on the city wall, suddenly shouted, "Open the city gates." Below, the city gate was opened, and the citizens of the state of Jiang immediately rushed into the city, while countless soldiers rushed out of the city. Don't panic. Among the Chu Kingdom's infantry, a middle-aged general suddenly roared, "Form groups of 5 immediately." Meanwhile, a ray of light suddenly flashed and then it pierced through the center of the general's forehead, causing his voice to stop abruptly. Not only that, but some of the generals in the infantry had also fallen. To catch bandits, first capture the ringleader. The sleeping commanders were killed one after another, and the Chu soldiers were instantly thrown into chaos. Flee. Countless soldiers fled into the distance, and Yi Xian's group and Jiang Jiu naturally wouldn't let such an opportunity slip by. Immediately Yi Xian and the others led the charge, and everywhere they passed, corpses were left behind. Ordinary soldiers couldn't stop them at all. Just like that, the group of Chu Kingdom's infantry continued to flee, while Yi Xian and the others madly pursued them. In the distance, the middle-aged man in the lead of the group of Chu Kingdom's cavalry suddenly raised the sword in his hand. Kill! Almost 100,000 cavalrymen suddenly roared in anger, and in the blink of an eye, 100,000 cavalrymen directly charged out. For a time, the entire ground shook violently as if there was a great earthquake. 100,000 cavalrymen charging in unison, how terrifying was that? Yi Xian suddenly stopped, and the moment he stopped, Ling Han and the others stopped as well. Jiang Jiu arrived by his side and said, "Retreat." Yi Xian nodded and said, "Retreat." It wasn't long before Yi Xian's group and the soldiers of the state of Jiang retreated, and it wasn't long before they all retreated into the city. Meanwhile, the Chu Kingdom's cavalrymen outside the city had stopped as well. Cavalrymen naturally couldn't attack the city. Above and below the city walls, the two armies faced each other. Below the city walls, in front of the cavalrymen, a middle-aged man slowly rode his horse to a place not far from the city walls. He raised his head to look at Yi Xian, who was on the city walls, and asked, "You are state scholar Yi of the state of Jiang?" Beside Yi Xian, Jiang Jiu said softly, "This person is the marshal of the Chu Kingdom's cavalry, Xiao Yunshan, and he is at the peak stage of the divine combination tier." Yi Xian nodded slightly and looked down. "Do you have any advice for me?" Xiao Yunshan said calmly, "I have long heard that you are the most monstrous genius of the state of Jiang after Enlanxiu. Today I would like to exchange a few moves with you." Hearing this, Jiang Jiu, who was beside Yi Xian, frowned and said, "It's a trap. He is the marshal of an army, so under normal circumstances, he wouldn't come alone to take such a risk." At this time, the countless soldiers of the state of Jiang on the city walls suddenly shouted in unison, "Fight! Fight!" Tens of thousands of soldiers roared in unison, their voices deafening like thunder. Countless soldiers looked at Yi Xian excitedly. In the state of Jiang, Yi Xian's prestige was undoubtedly extremely high, to the point that it was ridiculously high. And among the citizens and soldiers of the state of Jiang, Yi Xian was invincible. The swordsman of the state of Jiang. Everyone felt an indescribable sense of confidence and anticipation towards Yi Xian. Seeing the excited and worshipful gazes of the surrounding soldiers, Jiang Jiu's face sank. If they didn't fight now, it would undoubtedly be a blow to their morale, but if they fought, she had a new worry. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "It's fine." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up and slashed his sword down towards Xiao Yunshan. Seeing Yi Xian jump down, Xiao Yunshan's mouth curled into a cold smile. He held his sword with both hands and soared into the sky, and similarly slashed his sword towards Yi Xian. Both of them had their own plans. Just like that, under the gazes of countless people, their swords were about to collide, and right at the instant that their swords were about to collide, Yi Xian suddenly changed the trajectory of his sword and stabbed it towards Xiao Yunshan's throat. A wisp of a savage smile appeared on the corners of Xiao Yunshan's mouth when he saw this. He actually didn't withdraw his sword, and he stabbed it towards Yi Xian's heart instead. A life for a life. Right when Yi Xian's sword was half an inch away from Xiao Yunshan's throat, Xiao Yunshan suddenly held tightly onto Yi Xian's sword with his left hand. At the same time, his sword stabbed directly into Yi Xian's abdomen where his heart was. When his sword stabbed into Yi Xian's body, Xiao Yunshan was instantly stunned. It was slightly unreal. Is Yi Xian that easy to kill? Right at this moment, the sword in his hand suddenly transformed into countless strands of energy that entered Yi Xian's body. Xiao Yunshan's expression changed drastically when he noticed this, and he was about to retreat when Yi Xian's sword suddenly spun. Xiao Yunshan's entire arm instantly shattered. Yi Xian's sword pierced straight through, aiming straight for Xiao Yunshan's head. However, right at this moment there was a sudden change. 3 strange black-robed men suddenly appeared behind Xiao Yunshan. They appeared without any warning. In the blink of an eye, a cold flash blocked Yi Xian's sword, while the other 2 cold flashes sliced towards Yi Xian's throat at an extremely fast speed. Extremely fast. However, Yi Xian was already mentally prepared. The instant the 3 black-robed men appeared, he suddenly withdrew his sword and retreated several meters. At this moment, Ling Han and the others leaped down the city wall and arrived beside Yi Xian. 12 peak stage Divine Unity tier elites. Opposite Yi Xian and the others, after the 3 black-robed men failed in their first attack, they didn't continue to attack, and instead mysteriously disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian's right hand gripped the spirit elegant sword tightly, and he was just about to continue attacking when a white-robed old man suddenly appeared in front of him. Middle-earth Divine Continent Warehouse, the guardian of the Academy of Wood. The white-robed old man glanced at Yi Xian and the others. He didn't speak and instead turned to look to the side. At this moment, a middle-aged man walked out from there. When they saw this middle-aged man, Ling Han and Ling Yu were immediately stunned. Because this person was the patriarch of their Ling clan, Ling Tian. Ling Tian glanced at Ling Han and his brother. Return to the central divine continent. Ling Han said gravely, Patriarch, what are you doing? Ling Tian shook his head. The Ling clan will not participate in this matter. The 2 of you, immediately return to the central divine continent with me. Ling Han's expression turned cold. No. Ling Tian said angrily, there are 2,700 people in the Ling clan. Do you want the entire clan to die with you? Ling Han clenched his fists tightly. At this moment, the sound transmission stones on Yi Li and the others all sounded, including Lu Banzwang. Everyone exchanged a look and soon the expressions of Yi Li, Gan Wuwei, and the others became extremely ugly. Yi Xian asked softly, what is it? Yi Li said gravely, something has happened to the clan. Tell me to return immediately. Gan Wuwei looked at Yi Xian and said, me too. The others all nodded. Yi Xian fell silent. Nearby, the white-robed elder glanced at Ling Han and the others and said, it's not that our Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm don't have the ability to kill you. We just don't want to fight to the death with the forces behind you. If you retreat, the grudges between our Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm with you will be written off. If you don't retreat, then our Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm will fight to the death with your clans. Yi Li and the others' expressions became extremely ugly when they heard this. Their clans added together weren't weak, especially the Lu clan, which was a powerful clan of the current era. However, their clans wouldn't allow them to fight to the death with Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm for the sake of Yi Xian. It wasn't worth it. The sound transmission stones in the arms of Yi Li and the others continued to ring. Beside the white-robed elder, Ling Tian suddenly sighed softly and said, you value your brothers, but what about your clans? Even if you don't value your clans, what about your parents? They gave birth to you and raised you, so do you not value them? Do you know how many people you're going to kill with this choice of yours? Ling Han clenched his fists tightly, his expression livid. Around him, Yi Li and the others were the same. Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm were no longer targeting the younger generation. They were going to start a war, an all-out war. If they wanted to fight, then all the elites of the 10,000 Dharma tier and above would be mobilized. And the clans behind Ling Han and the others couldn't possibly start an all-out war with Karaki Academy and the Dark Realm. It really wasn't worth it. Moreover, if they fought, they could easily be wiped out. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly asked softly, what do you think brothers are? Everyone turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, understood. If brothers can't understand each other, then they aren't brothers but rather selfish. As he said this, he turned to Ling Han and the others and said, "Now, as the eldest brother, I order you to immediately return to your respective clans, and then wait for me in the central divine continent. Wait for me to come find you. Believe me, there will be a day when we brothers will meet again." Brothers. In Yi Xian's eyes, brothers should not only go through trials and tribulations, share prosperity and live and die together, but they should also understand each other. Understand. If they couldn't understand each other, then that would be selfish. It was like asking a brother to borrow money. The brother himself couldn't even feed himself, yet you still wanted to borrow money from him. How could this be called brothers? No. This was selfishness, this was acting selfishly in the name of brothers. Yi Xian was a selfish person, but he would never be selfish to his own people. P.S. I recommend a book from my good friend Chongming Imperial Army. It's a very good book, everyone can read it. Finally, please subscribe. Subscription, monthly ticket, decide whether I eat chicken drumsticks or instant noodles this month. Please support me on my knees. Friends from other websites can also come to Zongheng Chinese Network to support me. Genius 1 second remember website address. Mobile version. Chapter 157. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Ling Han and the others were all looking at Yi Xian, and at this moment their eyes were already slightly red. They would stay in advance and retreat with Yi Xian. This was naturally what they were thinking. However, what about their clans? They were in a dilemma of loyalty and filial piety. At this moment Yi Xian walked up to Ling Han, patted his shoulder lightly and said with a smile, "If you go back, are we not brothers? No, even if you don't stay here, we are still brothers who will live and die together. You understand me just like I understand you." After saying this, he turned to Yi Li and the others and said, "Your actions have already brought danger to your clans. Protect your clans, this is also your responsibility. In this world there are not only brothers and friends but also relatives. All of you, go back, and wait for me to come to the central divine continent to find you." Ling Han shook his head, his eyes slightly red and said, "Big brother, if we leave, what will you do?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't worry. I still have some trump cards, it won't be a problem." None of Ling Han and the others left and they just stood there. At this moment, the eyes of these 7-foot-tall men were red, and there were tears in their eyes. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly looked at the nearby Lu Banzwang. Lu Banzwang hadn't said a word since the beginning. Yi Xian walked up to Lu Banzwang and Lu Banzwang glanced at him, still saying nothing. Yi Xian said softly, "Take them back and wait for me to come to the central divine continent." Lu Banzwang fell silent. Yi Xian said, "They should shoulder their own responsibilities and there is still time, we can wait for the future. Take them away and live well in the central divine continent. Don't weaken the reputation of our bandit army." Lu Banzwang looked at Yi Xian for a long time and finally said softly, "I can't not go back. If I don't, the Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm will declare war on the Lu clan, and many people in the clan will die." At this point, her eyes suddenly became wet and she said, "But if we go back, who will help you? Who will help you?" Hearing Lu Banzwang's words, Ling Han and the others suddenly felt their noses sting. Who is going to help Yi Xian? The Kuraki Academy and Dark World were clearly using their strength to bully others. Yi Xian was alone, and they were only barely able to resist them because of their presence. Now, if they were to leave, Yi Xian's situation would undoubtedly become even more difficult. Yi Xian smiled, "Do you still remember Shang Yu's words?" Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "I'm a stubborn person. I can't stand being bullied and I don't like to compromise. If anyone bullies me, I'll definitely bully them back. Even if I can't beat them, as long as they bully me, I won't tolerate it. I won't back down." At this point he smiled faintly and continued, "My temper is just like that. It couldn't be changed. If one day I'm beaten to death because of this, then I, Yi Xian, deserve it. I'm not strong enough, so I don't blame anyone. After you return, cultivate well. I promise you, I'll definitely come to the central divine continent to find you. At that time, I hope you'll still recognize me as your big brother." Big brother. Ling Han looked straight at Yi Xian and said, "Big brother Yi, you'll always be our big brother, always. And there will only be one big brother in the bandit mercenary group." Yi Li nodded, "Big brother once, big brother forever." The other members of the bandit mercenary group also nodded. Yi Xian smiled faintly and said, "We'll meet again someday." After saying this, he looked at Lu Banzwang and said, "You're the big sister, so you should have the demeanor of a big sister." Lu Banzwang glanced at Yi Xian, and then turned to walk toward the nearby black wolf. "Everyone immediately follow me." Ling Han looked straight at Yi Xian and said, Big brother, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother will wait for you. Big brother, my name is Lin Yunxian. This chapter is not the end, please continue. Speak, but I don't know how to speak. In any case, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother, you have to stay alive, you have to promise me. Big brother, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. My father threatened me with death. Big brother, I really want to stay, really. Not long after, Lu Banzwang and the others disappeared on the Black Wolf. In the distance, Lu Banzwang was expressionless, and beside her, Ling Han and the others' faces were already covered in tears. Stay. Everyone wanted to stay. However, there was nothing they could do. At this time, Ling Han suddenly roared, "When I return, I'll definitely become the patriarch, the patriarch." Yi Li nodded slightly. "I also want to be the patriarch." Everyone nodded. If they were the patriarchs, they would have the right to speak and could make decisions, and even mobilize the powerful forces of the clan. Only by becoming stronger would they have the right to speak, and the ability to control their own fate. Below Mizar City. Only when Yi Li and the others had completely disappeared in the distance did Yi Xian turn around. They'd all left. In truth, he was a little reluctant, because he really had feelings for them. Fighting together with a group of brothers, this kind of feeling was actually very good. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. He could not selfishly leave Ling Han and the others here, as this would harm their families. Just like Shang Yu, that youth wanted to live, really wanted to live, but in order not to drag everyone down, he decisively chose to commit suicide. At this time, Jiang Jiu suddenly walked to Yi Xian's side. Jiang Jiu said softly, "Me too." "Me too." Nearby, Mo Yunqi snickered. "Jiang Jiu. Mo Yunqi." Yi Xian laughed loudly, his laughter like thunder, shaking the horizon. Nearby, the white-robed elder suddenly said, "Yi Xian, you can also be considered a talent. Those arrogant and unruly geniuses of the divine middle continent are willing to recognize you as their big brother, and are even willing to risk their lives for you. Unfortunately, this is of no use. Let me tell you, just like how the headmaster of Jiang Country's Kuraki Academy, Li Xuanzang, said, not joining our Kuraki Academy is the greatest loss of your life." Yi Xian shook his head with a smile and said, "Don't say any more nonsense. Just be frank about how you want to fight." The white-robed old man nodded slightly. "As you wish." As soon as he finished speaking, he moved to the side. Meanwhile, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian recognized the man. It was the gray-clothed man who'd fought him that day. The gray-clothed man's arms were covered in black iron hoops. Yi Xian smiled. "It seems like it isn't enough." The gray-clothed man's eyes instantly narrowed when he heard Yi Xian. A moment later, he suddenly stomped his right foot against the ground, and he instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian. After that, he smashed his arms down towards Yi Xian. At this moment, the black iron hoops on his arms started to revolve violently and emanated strands of fierce energy. Yi Xian's face was emotionless as he raised his hand and stabbed. Bang! The gray-clothed man was instantly blasted over 30 m back. As soon as he stopped moving, the ground beneath his feet instantly cracked apart, and his hands were trembling incessantly. Yi Xian walked towards the gray-clothed man with his sword in hand, and a wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of his mouth. "Is that all the monstrous geniuses of the Central Divine Prefecture are like this?" The gray-clothed man's expression instantly became ferocious when he heard this. Meanwhile, the white-robed old man spoke abruptly. "Every single strike of his sword is filled with his full strength. You'll definitely suffer a loss if you hold back in the slightest." The gray-clothed man clenched his fists tightly again. "This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page." He squatted down in a half-squat. Crack. In an instant, the ground in an area of over 100 m cracked apart. At the same time, a formidable aura suddenly surged out from within him, and it pressed down towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not stop. He continued to walk forward, and his body was also emitting a powerful aura. His sword aura. He walked towards the gray-clothed man, and it didn't take long for his sword aura to collide with the gray-clothed man's aura. Bang! The ground around them trembled violently. Yi Xian stopped moving, but it didn't take long for him to continue forward. The gray-clothed man's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. He'd underestimated Yi Xian's sword aura. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly sped up, and his speed was growing faster and faster. He just charged towards the gray-clothed man with his sword in hand. Moreover, his aura was growing stronger and stronger. In the end, it was like a torrent that seemed capable of destroying everything. A single strike of the sword would decide life and death. The white-robed old man's expression changed when he witnessed this scene. Was aura. Regardless of whether it was the cultivation of the martial arts or the sword, both of them condensed aura, and intent came after aura. Aura came before intent. Many people felt that intent was more important than aura. However, it wasn't. Aura could be said to be as important as intent, because aura could be gathered and borrowed. At this moment, Yi Xian had faintly started to borrow aura. At this moment, not far away, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. The white-robed old man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. Obviously, Yi Xian hadn't comprehended this point. Borrowing aura wasn't something that could be understood just by talking about it, but one had to comprehend it himself. If one could comprehend it, then one could borrow it. If one couldn't, then one couldn't borrow it. Earlier, Yi Xian clearly had the aura to comprehend it, but now that aura was gone. However, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly frowned and said softly, "Aura? My battle intent and sword intent can fuse into this sword aura, but what about the others?" Others? As he spoke, he held the sword in his right hand and spun it lightly. In an instant, a light breeze was stirred into a vortex by the sword, and soon the light breeze fused into his sword. Yi Xian was overjoyed when he had seen that. It was really possible. On the other side, the white-robed old man suddenly roared furiously, "Kill him! Kill him!" At this moment, the white-robed old man's eyes were filled with shock. Because once Yi Xian really comprehended the true profundities of aura, it meant that he might advance from a grandmaster of the sword to a sword master. He could use the sword to control the wind, the sword to control the earth, and the sword to control everything in the world. Sword master. When he thought of this, the white-robed old man was exasperated. Attack together. Attack together. As soon as the white-robed old man spoke, a few more people suddenly appeared. It was Li Mulin who had stalled Ling Yu earlier, an archer with a longbow on his back and a one-armed man. Yi Xian was familiar with this man as well. The red figure on the second floor belonged to this one-armed man. 3 monstrous geniuses on the monstrous genius rankings and a middle-aged man. Other than that, there were also 6 ghost-like shadowy figures that quietly appeared around Yi Xian. These 6 people immediately surrounded Yi Xian. Elite Dao soldiers from the dark world. Just how terrifying was this lineup? Naturally, Yi Xian could not continue comprehending at a time like this. Although it was a pity to lose this opportunity, he had no other choice. Just as he was about to exit that mysterious state, a jade-white hand suddenly landed lightly on his shoulder. Immediately after, a voice rang out in his ear. "Continue. I'll deal with them." Hearing this voice, Yi Xian was stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 158. What a familiar voice. A voice I haven't heard in a long time. Enlancio. Little Un. When he heard this voice, even Yi Xian himself was stunned. Because he truly never imagined that Enlancio would actually make an appearance here at this critical moment. Enlancio was standing before Yi Xian. She still wore a white dress that wasn't tainted by a speck of dust, and she was still so beautiful to the point it was suffocating. Enlancio was once the most monstrous genius in the state of Jiang. What's she doing here? Yi Xian didn't think about this because he had more important things to do now. Comprehension. At most times, one had to grasp inspiration as soon as it arrived. Otherwise, once it vanished, then one wouldn't know when it would come again. This time, inspiration had suddenly appeared, and he'd entered such a state. It was undoubtedly a heaven-sent opportunity to him. I can't miss it. In next to no time, Yi Xian calmed his heart down completely. Enlancio stood before Yi Xian with an emotionless expression as she gazed at the group that was charging towards her, and she held a spear in her hand. Her expression was extremely calm as she watched the gray-clothed man and the others charge over, and there wasn't even the slightest ripple in her eyes. The person in the lead was the gray-clothed man. He'd already gathered formidable force as he ran, and every single step he took caused the ground to instantly crack open. It was an extremely astounding sight. Right when the gray-clothed man was around 10 m away from Enlancio dashed forward swiftly with the spear in her hand. In the next moment, a spear had suddenly arrived in front of the gray-clothed man. The gray-clothed man's pupils constricted abruptly because the speed of Enlancio's spear had greatly exceeded his expectations. So, he could only instinctively use his arms to block it. Bang! Under the gazes of countless people, the gray-clothed man instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. As soon as he stopped moving, he directly knelt on the ground, causing the ground to instantly explode apart. At the same time, the iron rings on his arms instantly transformed into a pile of fragments. Moreover, his arms had even been directly shattered into pieces and transformed into a pile of powder. The gray-clothed man was slightly stunned as he gazed at Enlancio who stood in the distance. I'm actually unable to resist a single spear strike? Not far away, Enlan didn't stop after she unleashed her spear. She pointed her spear diagonally at the ground, and in the next moment she swept her spear. At this moment the surrounding space actually became illusory. Space illusion. The nearby white-robed old man's expression changed drastically when he saw this scene, and he cried out involuntarily, "Spear Master! You actually reached the level of Spear Master." Not far away. Bang 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 bang. In an instant countless figures retreated. This retreat was no less than 1,000 feet. Among them, the one-armed man's left arm had been directly swept off by the spear, and he was now an armless man. As he looked at Enlancio, his eyes were also filled with terror. Spear owner. In the distance, the middle-aged man looked at Enlancio with slight astonishment. Who exactly are you? At this moment he was beyond shocked. It wasn't that the Central Divine Continent didn't have spear masters, but it was the first time he'd seen such a young spear master. Enlancio glanced at the middle-aged man but didn't reply, and she instead retreated to a spot not too far away from Yixian. She just stood there like that, like a god of war. On the other hand, no one dared to make a move. This was too terrifying. On the other side, the white-robed old man stared fixedly at Enlancio. Who exactly are you? Why are you interfering in the matters between my Kuraki Academy and the Dark World? If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Enlancio glanced at the white-robed old man. You're disgruntled? The white-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you aware of the consequences? He naturally didn't dare to attack rashly. After all, he wouldn't believe that such a genius didn't have someone backing her. Enlancio walked over to the white-robed old man with her spear in hand, and then she looked him in the eyes. Do you want a one-on-one battle or a group battle? One-on-one battle or a group battle? The surroundings were deathly silent. On the other hand, the white-robed old man's expression instantly turned savage. This was simply going too far. How could he endure this? He was about to attack right away, but right at this moment, numerous formidable auras suddenly enveloped him. All of them were above the peak of the myriad techniques realm. The white-robed old man's expression changed once more when he noticed this scene. Meanwhile, an old man appeared by Enlancio's side. The old man wore black clothes and his hands were hidden within his sleeves. His gaze was sharp like an arrow, and he just stared fixedly at the white-robed old man while his eyes didn't carry a trace of emotion. The white-robed old man glanced at Enlancio and the black-clothed old man. Which power are both of you from? At this moment, he was naturally shocked because it was utterly impossible for an ordinary power to foster such a genius, and it was impossible for an ordinary power to casually foster a few experts at the peak of the Dharma realm or above. The black-clothed old man glanced at the white-robed old man and said in a hoarse voice, "Fuck off right now." His voice was extremely unpleasant and slightly ear-piercing. The white-robed old man's face instantly turned livid, and he was about to flare up. However, a voice suddenly entered his mind, and it didn't take long for his pupils to constrict. After that, he took a deep and long glance at Enlancio. When he spoke up to hear, he didn't dare continue. After a short moment, the white-robed old man turned around and left, and the army of 100,000 cavalry left with him. They retreated very swiftly. Enlancio. There was no one in the Central Divine Prefecture that didn't know this name, because this name was ranked at the 6th position on the Monstrous Genius rankings. Yet she'd merely used a single day to rise from the 30th position to the 6th position. The power that stood behind such a person was a mystery, and it was a mystery even to Kuraki Academy. That was the most terrifying part. After all, Kuraki Academy was a large power in the Central Divine Prefecture. While its information network couldn't be said to be the best in the Central Divine Prefecture, it was absolutely not bad. Moreover, even Kuraki Academy hadn't been able to find any information about Enlancio's origins. The white-robed old man didn't dare threaten her with a life-and-death struggle because he didn't dare to. If he did, then perhaps Enlancio would really fight Kuraki Academy to the death. Because she really wasn't afraid. So, the white-robed old man retreated decisively. After the white-robed old man and the others retreated, Enlancio turned around. Meanwhile, Yixian had suddenly put the spirit gray sword away, and then he arrived in front of her. Enlancio was slightly stunned. He was interrupted? The corners of Yixian's mouth curled up slightly. I think so. Enlancio shook her head slightly. Be serious. Yixian chuckled, and then he spoke with a serious expression. And what are you doing here? Shawan. Enlancio was stunned. Obviously, she'd never imagined that Yi Xian would call her by her nickname because this nickname was something that only the 2 or 3 people closest to her could call her by. When the black-clothed old man heard Yi Xian call Enlancio by her nickname, he immediately frowned, and his face instantly sank when he noticed that Enlancio wasn't angry. He just stared fixedly at Yi Xian with an extremely gloomy expression. Enlancio sized him up. "If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page." She glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "Come with me." Yi Xian nodded. Just like that, the 2 of them walked away. The black-robed old man's face was dark the entire time. No one knew what he was thinking. At first, the 2 of them didn't say anything and just walked on. Finally, Yi Xian broke the silence. "Xiaoan, why are you here?" Enlancio lightly combed her hair behind her ear and said, "The matter of Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension targeting you has caused quite a stir in the Central Divine Prefecture." Yi Xian smiled and said, "That's why you've come." Enlancio stopped moving and then she turned around to look at Yi Xian. "I didn't want to come." Yi Xian was stunned. Enlancio shook her head. "My arrival will bring trouble to you, and this trouble isn't any less than the trouble that Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension brought to you, and it might even be more." When she spoke up to hear, she walked slowly towards the distance and said, "Many troublesome matters will come successively when I meet you this time. You're unable to endure all of this now, and I don't want you to be swept into it as well. However, you have no choice but to be swept into it now." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Your clan?" Enlancio nodded. "Besides mine there are others." When she spoke up to hear, she turned around to look at Yi Xian. "I'll leave immediately. After I leave, I'll do my best to restrain the members of my clan, but I can't restrain anyone else. Since you've chosen to become friends with me, you won't be able to avoid some troubles. Do you understand?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Enlancio shook her head. "You don't understand. True great clans attach great importance to one's background and lineage, as well as bloodline and natural talent. All of this is very complicated. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Do you want to break off all ties with me?" Enlancio looked at Yi Xian. "If I promise to my clan that I won't see you in the future, then Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension will vanish from this world tomorrow. On the other hand, if I choose to become friends with you, then your enemies won't just be Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension, they'll be someone even stronger than them." Yi Xian fell silent. Enlancio turned around and walked towards the black-robed old man, her expression very calm. Right at this moment, Yi Xian's voice suddenly came from behind her. "I choose the latter." Enlancio stopped her steps. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Little Lin, I know that choosing the latter will cause me to face many things and I might even die. However, I don't regret it. I don't know what it means to like or love. I only know that meeting you in this lifetime is the happiest thing that has happened to me. For you, for the friendship between us, I'm willing to use my life to protect it." As he spoke up to hear, he walked behind Enlancio. "I'm not afraid of Karaki Academy, I'm not afraid of your clan, and I'm not afraid of death. However, I'm truly afraid of becoming strangers with you from now on. I'm very afraid." Enlancio was silent for a very long time. In the end, she said in a light voice, "You're really stupid." Finished speaking, she walked towards the distance. No one noticed that the corners of her mouth slightly rose into an undetectable arc. At the side, the black-robed old man glanced coldly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled faintly at the black-robed old man. "Actually, I'm not bad. Really, I'm already a Grandmaster of the Sword Dao and a Grandmaster of the Martial Dao. Although I'm only at the Nether Passage realm, killing divine fusion experts is like chopping vegetables. You won't be able to find a man more outstanding than me in Azure Province." As he spoke, he became incomparably serious. "Really, don't be prejudiced against me. Properly understand me. I believe that you'll accept me. I'm really outstanding." The black-robed old man. End of this chapter. Chapter 159. The old man in black looked coldly at Yi Xian and didn't say a word. Yi Xian said seriously, "It's true. I'm not trying to brag, but your family can get a deeper understanding of me. As long as you get to know me, you'll realize that I'm an extremely outstanding person." The old man in black suddenly said, "I'm not from the Yin family." Yi Xian. The old man in black glanced at Yi Xian and didn't conceal the killing intent in his eyes, "But don't worry, we'll get a deeper understanding of you." With that, he glanced coldly at Yi Xian and turned to leave. Yi Xian was stunned and shook his head. "That's *King enemy?" At this moment, Jiangjiu walked to Yi Xian's side. She looked at the distant horizon and said softly, "Has she left?" Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. And Lanxiu had already disappeared into the horizon. She really left. She didn't stop at all. Jiang Jiu said softly, she left in such a hurry, the matter might be very serious. Yi Xian nodded, I know. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian and there was a trace of worry in her eyes. Lanxiu's family wasn't ordinary. If Yi Xian and Lanxiu were just ordinary friends, it might not be a big deal. But the problem was that Lanxiu's attitude towards Yi Xian was indeed not ordinary. For example, the way she called him Little An. She only knew that in the entire country of Jiang, only she could call Lanxiu Little An. In the past, her big brother, the country of Jiang's crown prince, had also called her that. At that time, Lanxiu didn't give the crown prince any face and directly pointed a spear at his face. Since then, besides her, no one else dared to call Lanxiu by her nickname. And just now Yi Xian had called her that. But Lanxiu didn't feel any disgust towards it. Actually, as long as one wasn't blind, one could see that Lanxiu's attitude towards Yi Xian wasn't ordinary. Was Yi Xian outstanding? He was definitely outstanding. However, in the eyes of these aristocratic families, this might not be enough. These aristocratic families had seen too many monstrous geniuses. Ordinary monstrous geniuses could not even enter their eyes. Moreover, to them, talent wasn't the only thing that mattered. Status and background were important as well. This was the so-called well-matched match in terms of social status. The rich and powerful clans attached great importance to this point. Yi Xian and Lanxiu were clearly of unequal social status. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, let's go. With that, he turned around and left. Jiang Jiu glanced at the end of the horizon, yet she couldn't see Lanxiu's figure any longer. After a short moment, she sighed lightly before turning around and leaving. Along with Lanxiu's appearance, the entire state of Jiang suddenly calmed down. Although the armies of the Chu country and the Yu country didn't completely retreat from the Jiang country's territory, they didn't launch another attack. They didn't dare to attack because they still didn't know what Lanxiu's intentions were. In short, Jianggu could finally take a breather. Mizar City was not big, only having a population of 500,000 to 600,000. However, with the arrival of the Chu Empire's army, the population of Mizar City had been reduced by at least half. They had all escaped. After Yi Xian returned to Mizar City, he walked along the streets alone. Thinking about many things. Actually, he'd already been interrupted outside the city. It hadn't been interrupted by external factors but by himself. Because he noticed that when he sensed his surroundings such as the wind, he was actually unable to calm down. Impetuous. When he wanted to calmly feel the wind around him, he realized how impetuous he was. He'd walked all the way since leaving Azure City. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Because I've truly been too impetuous. In this world there wasn't only fighting and killing, nor was there only cultivation. There were many other beautiful things and he'd been neglecting all of them. Now he just wanted to calm down and take a serious look at his surroundings. He wanted to seriously feel the wind, the streets and everything in his surroundings. As he walked, he'd unknowingly arrived by a river. There were rows of small houses on both sides of the river. At this moment there was no one in those houses. The houses on both sides of the street were empty. They'd fled. Once the war started, these ordinary people were simply as weak as a piece of paper in front of war. In Azure Province, the strong were respected, but not everyone could learn martial arts. Therefore there were more ordinary people. Ordinary people who had never learned martial arts had no ability to resist in the face of war. And to those top forces, wasn't he also an ordinary person? At this moment, a little girl suddenly ran in front of him. The little girl was about 5 or 6 years old and she was wearing an old tattered dress. The dress was really tattered and there were small holes everywhere. There were 2 large scars on her knees, and the blood had already coagulated. The little girl was wearing a pair of worn-out straw sandals. The soles of the straw sandals had already been worn out, so the little girl's 5 toes were curled inward. This was because when she stretched them out, her toes would come into intimate contact with the ground. The little girl raised her head and looked at Yi Xian. Her eyes were very watery as she said in a clear voice, "Brother Yi, thank you for saving us just now." Yi Xian was stunned. He turned his head. Not far away there were several people, both men and women. Clearly these people were the little girl's relatives. At this moment, a middle-aged man hurriedly walked in front of Yi Xian. He knelt down and kowtowed heavily. "We are the people who were chased by the Chu army outside the city. If State Scholar Yi had not appeared, we would have died outside the city. Thank you, State Scholar Yi, for saving our lives." Not far away the few people also knelt down. The little girl in front of Yi Xian also wanted to learn from the adults and kneel down, but she was carried by Yi Xian. The middle-aged man's expression changed greatly. Tong Tong, come down quickly. Don't dirty state scholar yes clothes. The little girl was about to break free from Yi Xian, but Yi Xian smiled and said, don't move. Let me carry you. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. A dirty? Yi Xian gently kissed the little girl's cheek. He smiled and said, not dirty at all. The little girl blinked. Then she gently kissed Yi Xian. Yi Xian laughed. He faced the middle-aged man and said, get up. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and then stood up. But his body was still half-bowed. This was not fear but respect. Respect from the bottom of their hearts. Yi Xian asked, do you have a place to go? The middle-aged man shook his head. I didn't know where to go before. Now I want to go to the imperial capital because it might be safer there. Safer. Yi Xian was silent. After a moment he said softly, the journey to the imperial capital is long. You don't have the ability to protect yourselves. It's too dangerous. How about staying in the city? The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. The army outside the city? Yi Xian smiled and said, I promise you that this city will not be breached by the army of Chu. You can stay in the city without worry. How about it? The middle-aged man and the others looked at each other. Then they all knelt down. The middle-aged man bowed deeply. We believe in state scholar Yi. Yi Xian said softly, get up. The middle-aged man and the others got up. Yi Xian placed the little girl in his arms on the ground. He gently rubbed the little girl's head. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. The child smiled and said, you are called Tong Tong? The little girl quickly nodded. Big brother, is it nice? Yi Xian smiled and said, nice? Very nice. He opened his right hand. 2 scrolls appeared in his hand. Then he pointed with his finger. The 2 scrolls turned into a white light and disappeared into the little girl's forehead. Cultivation method and martial skill inheritance. The little girl was stunned for a long time. Finally she looked at Yi Xian and said in a crisp voice, Big brother? What is this? Yi Xian said softly, you can cultivate according to the method in your head. You have to cultivate slowly. In the future you can be as powerful as Big brother. The little girl blinked. Really? Yi Xian smiled and said, really? However, you can't tell others about this. Just treat it as a little secret between you and Big brother, okay? The little girl quickly nodded. Yi Xian opened his right palm. A money bag appeared in his hand. He threw the money bag to the middle-aged man. Live well in the city. Treat Tong Tong well. Give her 2 sets of good clothes and shoes. I like this little girl very much. In the future I will come to Kaiyang City to see her. The middle-aged man quickly said, okay. Then he and the others bowed deeply to Yi Xian. Then they pulled Tong Tong and left. Not long after, Tong Tong suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Big brother, will you come to find me? Yi Xian smiled and said, yes. Tong Tong smiled sweetly. I will wait for Big brother to come. Then she turned and left with the middle-aged man and others. Watching the little girl leave, Yi Xian smiled slightly. He turned to face the river in front of him. Suddenly he found that his one thought might be able to determine the life and death of many people. If it was an evil thought, many people might die. If it was a good thought, it might be able to change a person's life or even the lives of countless people. Thinking of this, boom. A sword intent suddenly swept out of his body. This sword intent scattered towards the small river. The surface of the small river in front of Yi Xian suddenly surged with waves. But gradually, a strange phenomenon appeared on the river surface. The left side of the river, which was covered by the sword intent, was like boiling water. But the right side, which was covered by the sword intent, was extremely calm with only slight ripples. One side of the river, one kind of sword intent. They were 2 extremes. Just like this, after an unknown period of time, the sword intent on the river surface suddenly surged back into Yi Xian's body like a tide. But the next moment, the sword intent swept out of his body again. The sword intent followed the surface of the small river and vibrated into the distance. On the entire surface of the small river, the water on the left side was violently boiling, while the right side, which was covered by the sword intent, was extremely calm. After a few breaths, the sword intent suddenly disappeared. On the shore, Yi Xian's lips curled up. So that's how it is. One good thought, thousands of mountains and rivers. One evil thought, the world will change. Good and evil. Good and evil sword intent. Good and evil sword Tao. If I do good, thousands of mountains and rivers. If I do evil, the world will change. When Yi Xian's mind was clear in his body at the top of the World Prison Pagoda, one of the three swords suddenly trembled. P.S. Let me recommend another book, Open a Clinic to Cultivate. It's also published by Vertical and Horizontal in the city. It's very worth reading. Everyone should go read it. Finally, some people said that our Sword Supreme's book comment section is dead. There's not a single living person. Brothers, stop lurking. Come out and leave a comment like, Boss Egg is the most handsome, to prove that you all still exist. It also proves that there are still people reading my book and it's not a standalone game. End of this chapter. Chapter 160. At the top of the prison pagoda, the sword trembled for a moment before returning to normal. However, Yi Xian did not realize it. Outside the pagoda, Yi Xian spread his arms and greedily absorbed the fresh air around him. At this moment he felt extremely relaxed. This relaxation was not only in his heart but also in his mind. Previously, his understanding of his sword principle was somewhat vague. This vagueness meant that he did not have a clear understanding of his sword principle. Not to mention his sword principle, he did not even have a concept of sword intent. But now everything was clear. It felt like the clouds had parted and he could see the clear sky. Good and evil. One thought could be good and the other could be evil. Actually, previously, his sword intent was not considered good and evil sword intent. It was only the embryonic form of good and evil sword intent. However, the moment his mind was clear, his sword intent was considered to have reached the level of good and evil sword intent. Yi Xian realized that his sword intent was much stronger than before. If he were to encounter the man in gray who had fought with him previously, he was confident that he could kill him within 5 moves, and this was under the situation where he did not have to decide life and death with one strike. Was sword intent divided into realms? Yi Xian had some doubts in his mind, but unfortunately he did not get an answer. This was because Sister Sword Celestial was still in a deep sleep. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian walked along the river. He extended his right hand to the right with his palm facing outwards. A light breeze brushed past and he felt a chill in his palm. Sensation. Just like when he was cultivating the sword eye, he could sense everything around him. However, this time he was not just sensing, he was also borrowing. When he was fighting with the gray-clothed man, he fused his battle will and sword intent into his sword force. At that moment an idea popped into his mind. Since battle will and sword intent could be fused into his force, why couldn't other things do the same? For example, the wind or the earth. Yi Xian stepped on the ground. This time he did not activate the Tao Law because the Tao Law belonged to someone else. It was ready-made and did not belong to him. Just like that, Duan Ling Tian's body emitted a strand of force as he walked. Sword momentum. Gradually, countless battle will and sword will melded into his force, and the wind that passed through his palm suddenly stopped and then gathered into his force. Not only that, but the ground under his feet suddenly trembled. Very soon, the power of the earth flowed from his feet to his body, and finally gathered into his force, like a tide. At this moment, the aura emanating from his body was even more terrifying. On the surface of the river on his right, the water was boiling. At the same time, with every step he took, the ground in front of him would crumble. Force. Take advantage of the situation. At this moment, Yi Xian was very excited because he realized that he could really borrow power. Not only could it be borrowed, but it could also be fused. He fused all of this into his force. For example, battle intent, sword intent. When all of these were integrated into his sword force, it was no longer just a sword force. The momentum had already transformed. More accurately, it was no longer just a person's momentum. A person's momentum was still limited to him. It was like a cup of water. The capacity of the cup was limited, but if this cup was placed into a basin and broken, the water would increase. This force was like water. If he wanted to store more, he had to break through his own shackles. Yi Xian walked forward slowly, gradually on his right. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. A powerful force appeared in the river. Water force. The water force gathered towards him bit by bit, bang. The ground under Yi Xian's feet was no longer collapsing, but completely shattered. The force that gathered on his body was so strong that the ground under his feet could no longer bear it. It was unstoppable. Together with his good and evil sword will, he could easily kill a Nether Passage realm expert with this force. If he fought against the man in gray again, he was confident that he could kill him in 3 strikes. If he used life and death with one sword, he could do it with 1 strike. A person's strength could not be measured by their realm. Concept, momentum, combat experience, and equipment. None of these could be lacking. At this moment, Other than his realm, he had reached his peak in all other aspects. If he reached the Divine Unity realm, his strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Yi Xian suddenly stopped and pressed his right hand down. Disperse. As he spoke, the force that gathered on his body disappeared without a trace. The river regained its calm. Sword Master. Yi Xian's lips curled up slightly. He should be considered a sword master now. As if he thought of something, he pointed his finger forward and a ray of sword light flashed. 300 feet away, a tree branch fell with a crack. Just as it was about to hit the ground, the Spirit Elegance sword suddenly appeared. The tree branch landed firmly on the Spirit Elegance sword. The next moment, with a flash of sword light, the Spirit Elegance sword appeared in front of him. The smile on Yi Xian's face gradually widened. Compared to before, his current Imperial sword technique had undergone a qualitative transformation, be it in terms of speed or strength. Most importantly, he was now able to control the sword with ease. It was not stiff at all. It was as if the sword was part of his hand. At this moment, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian, the fifth-floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Yi Xian tapped his right foot lightly and activated the Tao Law. The aura on his body was instantly concealed by the Tao Law. To be precise, he was using the power of the earth to conceal himself. A long time ago he had already discovered that this Tao Law could conceal his aura and realm. However, there was no need for him to conceal himself previously. But now he didn't want to reveal his true strength. He wanted to keep a trump card as it would have an unexpected effect. The fifth-floor master walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled bitterly. Little friend, clasp your fists. My Drunken Immortal Inn has chosen to withdraw from this matter. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he nodded slightly. I have expected it. The fifth-floor master shook his head. Apologies. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, please don't say that. I'm already greatly indebted to the Drunken Immortal Inn. As he spoke, he said seriously, it is a favor for the Drunken Immortal Inn to help me. Even if you don't help me, it is also your duty. Moreover, during this period of time, the Drunken Immortal Inn has helped me several times when I was in danger. I, Yi Xian, will never forget this favor. If the Drunken Immortal Inn needs anything in the future, I, Yi Xian, will not shirk my duty. The fifth-floor master had a complicated look in his eyes. If he helped Yi Xian in the beginning because he wanted to rope in the Sword Immortal behind Yi Xian, then now he really admired Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was impulsive at times, he was a very loyal person. Back then, Karaki Academy not accepting Yi Xian was definitely the stupidest decision in 100 years. If such a genius was accepted, as long as you treated him well, he would use his life to repay you. Just like Old Man Ji, Azure Billow Academy. The fifth-floor master shook his head and sighed. He spread his hands and a long box appeared in his hands. He handed the box to Yi Xian. Young friend, this is what you need. Yi Xian opened the box. Inside the box there were two swords that looked exactly the same. The swords were longer, about 5 feet long. If this chapter is not finished, please continue. The swords were very narrow, less than a finger's length. Thin swords. The fifth-floor master said softly, these two swords are called Jiaying. They are not ordinary swords but flying swords. They are custom-made for sword immortals who mainly use sword kinesis. If young friend can use sword kinesis with this sword, your power will increase by at least 2 times. My Drunken Immortal Inn has already erased swordsman's imprint. Young friend, you can use it at any time. Jing. Yi Xian faced the box, and with a flick of his right hand's fingers, the two swords flew out of the box. Yi Xian pointed his fingers forward. In an instant, the two swords appeared behind 2 trees 500 feet away. The next moment, the two swords returned to Yi Xian. 500 feet away at the top of the 2 trees, 2 leaves fell slowly. Seeing this scene, the fifth-floor master was a little shocked. He knew that Yi Xian knew how to ride a sword, but he never imagined that the speed of Yi Xian's sword would be this fast. It was so fast that even he was a little shocked. This was not a speed that a Nether Passage Realm cultivator could achieve. In front of the fifth-floor master, Yi Xian gently stroked the 2 swords. He exclaimed, Jiaying, what a good sword. The 2 swords seemed to sense something. They trembled slightly and let out a soft sword hum. Yi Xian laughed and put away the 2 swords. Then he cupped his fists at the fifth-floor master. Senior, thank you. After saying this, he took out a gold card. At this moment, the fifth-floor master suddenly shook his head. No need. This sword is a gift from my Drunken Immortal Inn. Yi Xian shook his head and said seriously, friendship is friendship, business is business. After saying this, he took out a gold card and placed it in front of the fifth-floor master. Seeing that the fifth-floor master did not accept it, he said seriously, "If Senior does not accept it, I will not trouble the drunken immortal any more." Hearing this, the fifth-floor master smiled bitterly and put away the 2 gold cards. In the gold cards there were 200 million gold coins. Yi Xian smiled. "Senior, if it is possible, I may have to trouble you in for information in the future. Apart from that, if I want to sell anything, I may have to look for you." The fifth-floor master said seriously, "The higher-ups have already instructed that as long as it is within the scope of the Drunken Immortal Inn's ability, the Drunken Immortal Inn will do its best to help you. However, this expert—" Yi Xian smiled. "It is enough. Senior, we will meet again." After saying this, he turned and left. The fifth-floor master glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "If he does not fall, he will definitely become a sword immortal in the future." After saying this, he turned and disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian came to the city wall of Mizar City. Along the way, countless soldiers saluted and looked at Yi Xian with excitement. Swordsman. The swordsman of Jiang country. This was the honor of Jiang country. Yi Xian came to Jiang Jiu's side. Jiang Jiu looked at the end of the city wall and said softly, "They have not retreated yet." Yi Xian looked into the distance. At the end of his sight, he could still see a dense army. Chu country's cavalry. At this moment, a group of cavalry suddenly came from afar. There were not many of them, only about 20 people. From their clothes, they were not Chu country soldiers. Beside Yi Xian, Jiang Jiu said in a deep voice, "Great Cloud Country soldiers." Great Cloud Country finally appeared. Yi Xian faced the city wall. At this moment, the 20 people had already reached the city wall. The middle-aged man in the lead raised his head and looked at Yi Xian and Jiang Jiu. "Surrender. Or die." At this moment, a sword suddenly pointed at the middle-aged man's forehead. On the city wall, Yi Xian faced down. "The wind is too strong. I did not hear you clearly. Please say it again." Everyone, end of this chapter. Chapter 161. The battlefield suddenly quietened down. Below the city, the 20 or so cavalrymen stared at Yi Xian, especially the middle-aged man who was leading them. Although a sword was pressed against his forehead, there was no fear in his eyes. "If you don't surrender, the day the army enters the city will be the day you will be beheaded." Yi Xian gave the middle-aged man a thumbs up. "You've got guts." The middle-aged man sneered. "Kill me? You won't dare even if you have 100 guts." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" The middle-aged man pointed at himself. "I'm a soldier of Great Cloud Empire. I'm here on behalf of Great Cloud Empire. If you kill me, Great Cloud Empire, chi." The elegant spirit sword suddenly pierced through the middle-aged man's forehead. The middle-aged man's voice stopped abruptly. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. On the city wall, Yi Xian opened his palm and the elegant spirit sword flew into his hand. A drop of blood slowly dripped from the tip of the sword. Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man and shook his head. "How dare you threaten me like this? Don't I have any face?" The middle-aged man was speechless. A few breaths later, the middle-aged man fell from his horse, but his eyes were wide open. He died with everlasting regret. The rest of the Great Cloud Empire soldiers were enraged when they saw the middle-aged man was killed. One of them pointed at Yi Xian and said angrily, "How dare you kill our Great Cloud Empire, chi?" Without any warning, a sword suddenly pierced through the soldier's throat. The soldier fell to the ground from his horse. Blood spurted out of his throat. Staring at Yi Xian, he held his throat with both hands. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not stop the blood from spurting out. Yi Xian turned to the rest of the soldiers. "Do you have anything to say about their fate?" At this moment, the soldiers were horrified. At the same time, they realized that this guy wasn't afraid of Great Cloud Empire at all. Run. Without any hesitation, the remaining dozen cavalrymen turned and fled. Jiang Jiu suddenly asked beside Yi Xian, "Why didn't you kill them all?" Yi Xian smiled and turned to face the soldiers on the wall. "Do you see that? This was the power of Great Cloud Empire. The soldiers of Great Cloud Empire weren't invincible. They could still be killed and cowered. So, why should the men of Jiang be afraid of the Great Cloud Empire? If one comes, we'll kill one. Even if we die, we'll take one down with us." On the city wall, the soldiers who had solemn expressions suddenly became excited. Countless soldiers roared in unison, "Kill whoever comes. I'll kill whoever comes." His voice was like thunder resounding through the clouds. Sensing this scene, Yi Xian smiled. Morale. The small countries in Qing province were actually in awe of Great Cloud Empire because it was the largest empire in Qing province. In fact, Great Cloud Empire had once annihilated a country with a team of 100 cavalrymen. Therefore these soldiers were very fearful of Great Cloud Empire. If they did not raise the morale of these soldiers, the state of Jiang would have been defeated before the battle even started. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian with an undetectable curve on the corner of her mouth. Yi Xian suddenly said, "I'm going back to Azure Waves Academy." Jiang Jiu asked, "When will you be back?" Yi Xian answered, "Soon." Jiang Jiu sighed. "If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. I'll wait for you." Yi Xian nodded. Because of Shaoan Chu Karaki Academy, and Dark World won't make a move for a while. But be careful. I'll be back in 2 days at the latest. Finishing his words, he turned and left. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian's back until Yi Xian disappeared at the end of the horizon. Yi Xian didn't ride the cloud ship. Instead he rode the black wolf that Lu Banzwang left for him. Because the speed of the black wolf had surpassed the cloud ship, it would take him at most half a day to return to Azure Waves Academy from Mizar City. He had to make a trip back to Azure Waves Academy because it was impossible to resist Chu's army with the military strength of Two Realm City, especially when Great Cloud Empire was involved. He had to find reinforcements. As for the 2 Jiang swords, he didn't devour them because he found it hard to reach Spirit Unite Realm with 2 bright grade swords given his current realm. He needed at least 5 swords. Under such circumstances, it was better to keep the 2 swords. Now that he had the 2 swords, his combat strength would rise to a new level. 100 miles away from Mizar City was the encampment of Chu's army. Inside a tent. Impudent! A bellow suddenly sounded. Inside the tent, a middle-aged man clad in iron armor glared at a soldier kneeling on the ground in front of him. His eyes were filled with malevolence. "Does Jiang country really humiliate my Great Cloud Empire?" The soldier lowered his head, replying to General, what this subordinate said was true. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. "Pass down my order. Great Cloud Cavalry assemble." At this moment, a white-robed elder and a black shadow suddenly appeared in the tent. The white-robed elder glanced at the soldier kneeling on the ground. "Stand down." The soldier hurriedly retreated. The white-robed elder looked at the middle-aged man. "General Li Feng, did King Kaoshan tell you to listen to my orders?" The middle-aged man named Li Feng's expression was rather unsightly. The white-robed elder said indifferently, "General Li, that Yi Xian even dared to slaughter my Karaki Academy. Do you think he's afraid of your Great Cloud Empire? Not only is he extremely talented, but he also has a sword immortal backing him. Moreover, Enlancio suddenly came back to help him. Before we figure out Nguisher's intention, you're not allowed to organize anything. Otherwise you'll be punished according to the military order." Li Feng clenched his fists and his face was livid, but he still nodded. The white-robed elder's expression was also somewhat unsightly. Because of Enlancio, they were now in a deadlock here. The reason why they didn't dare to make a move was that they hadn't found out Enlancio's identity and background. Most importantly, they were afraid that the force behind Enlancio would also join in. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Country and Dark World didn't dare to act rashly. But if they didn't make a move, he was afraid. He was afraid of giving Yi Xian more time to grow. Previously at Mizar City, Yi Xian had almost taken advantage of the situation to become a sword master. At that moment he was really terrified. Because once Yi Xian became a sword master, it meant that Karaki Academy and Dark World wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Because the geniuses they could invite were at most those who were below the top 20 on the demon-level geniuses list. If they went any higher, the price would be too great. And if Yi Xian became a sword master, then they would have to invite the top 10 geniuses on the demon-level geniuses list to have a chance of killing Yi Xian. As for the top 10 geniuses, Karaki Academy wouldn't be able to come into contact with them. Moreover, these geniuses wouldn't lack money because they were already on another level. So, once Yi Xian became a sword master, under the situation that the Myriad Law's realm didn't appear, this chapter isn't over, please continue to the next page. At that time, the situation between Karaki Academy and Dark World would become very, very bad. Fortunately, Yi Xian had failed. Outside the city, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Xian hadn't succeeded in taking advantage of the situation. So long as Yi Xian hadn't attained the Sword Master realm, then they were still able to kill Yi Xian without paying too great of a price. But now Enlancio had appeared. When he thought of Enlancio, the white-robed old man's face instantly sank. She really is an extraordinary genius. The problem was why Yi Xian knew such a genius? The nearby mistress of the Dark World suddenly said, "Brother Li Mu, do we need to invite those Dao Protectors?" Dao Protectors. The white-robed old man called Li Mu said in a low voice, "If we invite them, then we'll probably have to pay a great price." The mistress of the dark world said, "Only they would be able to find out exactly who that woman is." Li Mu fell silent. Right at this moment, a black-clothed old man suddenly appeared here. Li Mu's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when he saw this black-clothed old man, and he was slightly vigilant. Because this person was precisely the person that followed by Enlanchio's side that day. The black-clothed old man glanced at the nearby mistress of the dark world who'd concealed herself. "Don't make a fool of yourself with this inferior concealment technique of yours." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot on the ground. Bang! A muffled bang resounded from the corner of a wall that was over 10 m away, and then a middle-aged man that wore a black robe appeared within everyone's field of vision. He'd revealed his true form with a single strike. The mistress of the dark world looked at the black-clothed old man with dense fear in her eyes. The black-clothed old man looked at the white-robed old man. "I know what all of you are worried about. Don't worry, we won't interfere in the matter between all of you and Yi Xian." Li Mu frowned slightly. "Why?" A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of the black-clothed old man's mouth. "Because we want him dead as well. However, because of young Missin we can't make a move. No matter if it's in the open or in the dark, we can't make a move. Of course she can't make a move as well." Li Mu said in a low voice, "Who exactly are you?" The black-clothed old man said indifferently, "This has nothing to do with all of you. I've only come to tell all of you that you can deal with that Yi Xian as you please. This person is only in the Nether Passage realm. Even though he's a grandmaster of the Way of the Sword, he shouldn't be much to your Kuraki Academy and the Dark World." As he spoke, he stood up. "I'll give you a suggestion. If you want to make a move again, it's best to gather all of your strength and kill him in one strike. Don't go one by one for him to practice on." Li Mu glanced at the black-clothed old man. "This person isn't as simple as you think." The black-clothed old man snorted coldly. "If it wasn't for young Missin, killing him would be as easy as snapping a finger. What all of you did earlier was truly foolish to the extreme. If you gather all of your strength, wouldn't it be a simple matter to kill him?" As he spoke, he turned to leave. However, he quickly stopped. "There's already someone rushing over from the Central Divine Prefecture. He'll be here soon. When the time comes, he'll assist all of you. At that time, I hope that all of you will use all of your strength and use all of your trump cards to kill this person in one strike." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure trembled and vanished. Within the tent, Li Mu and the mistress of the dark world exchanged a glance. A moment later, Li Mu said in a low voice, "The mistress of the dark world, immediately summon the Dao soldiers of the dark world. General Li, immediately summon the Great Cloud Cavalry. Tell them to be ready at any time. Once Yi Xian dies, immediately break into the city and let the state of Jiang accompany him in death." As he spoke, he slowly closed his eyes. "This time we'll succeed or die trying." End of this chapter. Chapter 162. Songlan Academy. At the foot of Mount Jiyunshan, Yi Xian was stunned by the scene in front of him. At this moment, there were many people gathered at the foot of Mount Jiyunshan. They were all looking up at Mount Jiyunshan with eyes filled with anticipation. Yi Xian walked to a man's side. "Brother, what are you waiting for?" The man glanced at Yi Xian. "You don't know?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Please tell me." The man said, "State Scholar Yi Xian is coming back." Yi Xian was speechless. The man was excited. "It is said that he will return to Songlan Academy today. Therefore we are all waiting here. I'm already waiting here at daybreak." Yi Xian was stunned for a while before he said, "Everyone here is waiting for him?" The man nodded. "Yes, some of the people in front are even crazier. They came before daybreak." Yi Xian asked again, "How do you know he will return today?" The man smiled. "It spread throughout the capital." Yi Xian shook his head. It was probably Jiang Jiu who informed the king of Jiang and then spread the news. This was nothing, a small matter. Yi Xian patted the man's shoulder. "Yi Xian is just an ordinary person. There's nothing to see. Go back and have a good life. T. The man suddenly flew into a rage. "How can State Scholar Yi be an ordinary person? He is a State Scholar of Jiang, a swordsman of Jiang. How dare you insult him?" With that, he threw a punch at Yi Xian. "Insult him?" Yi Xian was stunned. "What did he say?" Sensing the man's punch, Yi Xian lightly tapped the tip of his foot and retreated a few feet. The man's punch missed and he was instantly stunned. At this moment, some people in the surroundings were already looking in their direction. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, A masked teenager suddenly pointed at Yi Xian angrily. I heard him insult state scholar Yi. Yi Xian was speechless. Some people instantly looked at Yi Xian when they heard the young man, and their eyes burned with rage. Yi Xian. In the hearts of the people of the state of Jiang, this name could not be said to be sacred, but it was definitely not to be offended. What Yi Xian had done in the Tang Kingdom had already spread throughout the entire Jiang Kingdom. His current fame was far greater than in Lan Xiu's. That was not the main point. The main point was that Yi Xian was defending the state of Jiang, fighting to protect the state of Jiang. He was a kingdom knight of Jiang country. He was also the swordsman of the kingdom of Jiang. A man suddenly walked up to Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian and asked in confusion, "Why do you look so familiar?" Yi Xian was speechless. Familiar? How could he not be familiar? Aren't you waiting for me? Actually, it was normal that these people didn't know him because he wasn't so famous when he was in the state of Jiang. Therefore, many people had never seen him before. Even if they had seen him before, they had only seen him once from afar. It was just a brief encounter. Naturally, Yi Xian did not want the misunderstanding to continue. He was about to explain when the man who had attacked him earlier suddenly said, "This guy looks shifty-eyed. I can tell he's not a good person at first glance. Why don't we beat him up first?" Yi Xian's face darkened. Shifty eyes? Fuck, I don't even have eyes. Even if you want to beat me up, can't you find another reason? At this moment, an exclamation suddenly resounded. It's Yi Xing. In next to no time, the crowd parted, and a woman walked over from afar. She was young, petite, and wore a dark green dress. There was a small braid on the back of her head. As she walked through the crowd, the braid swayed gently and she looked extremely cute. Yi Xian. She was now a little famous in Songlan Academy and the imperial capital because of her achievements in various aspects. Most importantly, she was the youngest among all the students in Songlan Academy. Hence, she was the most doted upon in the academy. Yi Xian glanced at the people in front of her. Why are you making a ruckus here? At this moment, the man who wanted to beat Yi Xian hurriedly said, Miss Yi, someone is insulting state scholar Yi. Hearing this, Yi Xian's face immediately turned cold. Oh. The man pointed at Yi Xian who was not far away, and the crowd hurriedly moved aside. When Yi Xian followed the man's finger and saw Yi Xian, she was immediately stunned on the spot. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled. What's wrong? Don't you recognize me? Yi Xian came back to her senses. She clenched her dress tightly and said nervously, Tang? Dean? When they heard these two words, the crowd instantly quieted down. At the side, the young man who wanted to beat Yi Xian directly sat on the ground. He was somewhat at a loss. Who am I? What did I do? Everyone, Yi Xian looked around and smiled. Thanks to everyone's kindness, I waited here. Now that everyone has seen me, I'm just an ordinary person. There's nothing special about me. Everyone can disperse. After saying that, he turned to Yi Xian. Return to the courtyard. Yi Xian hurriedly nodded and then obediently stood behind Yi Xian. Soon Yi Xian and Yi Xian disappeared from everyone's sight. At the side, the young man sitting on the ground was still at a loss. I actually wanted to beat him just now. In front of Songlan Palace. Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. Not far in front of him was Jianji. Jianji walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, You're back. Yi Xian nodded. Is everything okay? Jianji nodded slightly. Yes. Yi Xian said, Gather all the students. Jianji glanced at Yi Xian and then turned to leave. In less than 15 minutes, all the students gathered in front of Kanglan Hall. Looking at Yi Xian on the stage, the eyes of the students were filled with excitement and admiration. Kanglan Academy's current status in Jiang country was very high. The people of Jiang country respected Kanglan Academy from the bottom of their hearts. Now, everyone in Jiang country was truly proud to be a student of Kanglan Academy, and all of this was because of Yi Xian. On the left and right of Yi Xian were Jianji and Bai Zhe. Yi Xian took a step forward and glanced below him. There was a total of 42 students here. Amongst them, 21 were at the Skyfall realm, 9 were at the Nether Passage realm, and the rest were at the Qi-controlling realm. Yi Xian pondered deeply for a moment before he said, All of you should be aware that the armies of Chu Yu and Great Cloud Empires have arrived. There are 100,000 Chu cavalry outside Mizar City, and there are even Great Cloud Empires amongst them. If Mizar City is breached, then the Chu cavalry will be unobstructed, and they'll march all the way south. Countless people of Jiang country will die at their hands. When he spoke up to this point, his voice gradually grew louder. I've returned this time to ask all of you if all of you are willing to head to Mizar City with me and pledge your life to defend Jiang country? Join the army? The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Yi Xian would ask them to join the army. Yi Xian spoke softly. If the city is breached, then the Jiang country will perish. How could my Kanglin Academy be spared? Of course, I won't force all of you if you're unwilling. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly stood forward. I'm willing to head to Mizar City. As soon as Yi Xian stood forward, more and more people stood forward as well. Yi Xian felt slightly gratified when he noticed that all of them were willing to head to Mizar City, and he spoke softly. Do all of you know that most of you might not be able to return from this trip to Mizar City? A man who stood before Yi Xian grinned. Dean, you've been fighting for Mizar City all this while. How could we be afraid of death when our Jiang country is fighting with our lives on the line? We want to fight by the side of the Dean and we can't bring shame to the Dean. Right. We're willing to live and die with the Dean. I don't agree. Right at this moment, a cold shout suddenly resounded from the side. Yi Xian turned his head to look. Not far away, two people were walking over quickly. He naturally knew these two people. They were the two scholars he had invited, Mo Yuan and Feng Lan. Mo Yuan quickly walked in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. Have you ever thought that although these students' cultivation levels aren't low, they lack actual combat experience? If you bring them to the battlefield, many of them will die. Yi Xian calmly replied, it's precisely because they lack actual combat experience that we need more. Mo Yuan said in a deep voice, you're spoiling the seedlings through excessive enthusiasm. Do you know that if you bring them to the battlefield, these geniuses that you've painstakingly nurtured might all die? All your painstaking efforts and old man Ji's last wish will go up in smoke. Yi Xian shook his head and interrupted Mo Yuan. If the country perishes, how can the students of Kanglin Academy be safe? We are students of Kanglin Academy, but we are also citizens of Jiang country. We are not superior to others. We have the same responsibility to protect this country. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian continued, I don't want my students to be a flock of captive sheep. They must go out and experience the cruelty of war. For them, this is also a kind of cultivation. Otherwise, if Kanglin Academy is in danger one day, they won't even have the strength to fight. After seeing Ling Han, Lu Kuang, and the other geniuses of the divine central continent, he understood one thing. If they only cultivated at home and didn't go out to explore, they would be trash for the rest of their lives. Ling Han and the members of the 9th Mercenary Troop, did they cultivate? No. They had fought their way out. They experienced countless battles of life and death to reach the strength they had today. If the students of Kanglin Academy didn't go out and fight, they would never be able to compare to the geniuses and monsters of the divine central continent. A piece of iron would never become a sharp sword if it wasn't tempered thousands of times. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian for a long time. Gradually, his expression softened. Follow me. Yi Xian was a little puzzled because he realized that Mo Yuan and Feng Lan were a little mysterious. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian followed. The three of them arrived at the back of the mountain. Mo Yuan stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. He opened his palm and a box appeared in his hand. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What's this? Mo Yuan opened the box. Inside the box were 12 little golden men, each holding a golden spear in their hands. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian. The 12 golden men were once forged by an extremely talented emperor who gathered all the pure gold from the 9 prefectures in the world. Each golden man hides a formation within. Once spirit energy is injected into the formation and activated, the golden men can suppress the 9 prefectures. However, they were once heavily injured and their spirituality is damaged. Now, they are only equivalent to divine unity tier cultivators. Moreover, because the formation has been damaged, activating it requires many supreme-grade spirit tools. Yi Xian solemnly asked, how's the power? Mo Yuan gently flicked his right hand. One of the golden men in the box suddenly turned into a golden light and landed to the side. At this moment, the small golden man had turned into a big golden man that was much bigger than Yi Xian. Mo Yuan indifferently said, give it a try. Yi Xian flicked his finger and a sword ray suddenly struck the golden man. The golden man didn't move. The sword didn't even leave a mark on it. Yi Xian's face changed. His sword was a real sword. A moment later, Yi Xian turned to Mo Yuan. Conditions. Mo Yuan looked straight at Yi Xian. Join my Confucian Dao and become the representative of my Confucian Dao. If you're willing, my Confucian Dao will support you. P.S. I might be on leave because I'm going to Guangzhou. I have activities every day so I don't have any time to write. I can't take it anymore. His schedule for the day was too full. Sorry. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version. Chapter 163. The Confucian Tao. Yi Xian frowned when he heard Mo Yuan. The Confucian Tao? Mo Yuan nodded. An ancient cultivation force. Due to some special reasons, its orthodoxy collapsed and only a few inheritances were left. To tell you the truth, we are the successors of the Confucian Tao, and we shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the Confucian Tao. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, "Why me?" Mo Yuan shook his head and chuckled. "We've been to Azure Billow Continent and Azure Billow Academy. We've also come to Azure Prefecture and come into contact with Kuraki Academy. Although these two academies are called academies, they don't have an academic branch. They only focus on the cultivation and strength of their students, not on their knowledge and thoughts." He looked at Yi Xian and said, "Just when we were about to give up, Imperial Preceptor Lu asked us to come here and have a look. You've surprised us. We've seen hope here, and you're outstanding enough to reach the Sword Master level at such a young age. It's truly surprising." Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "You can see through me." There was a trace of shock in his voice. Because he'd used a Tao law to conceal his strength. Mo Yuan smiled. "If I'm not wrong, you should have a Tao law, right?" Tao law. Yi Xian's expression turned slightly solemn. "I've seriously underestimated them." Mo Yuan added, "Don't worry. We have no ill intentions towards you and we wouldn't dare to." We wouldn't dare. They'd seen the mysterious woman in the prison pagoda when she went on a rampage. Sword Immortal? They'd seen Sword Immortals, and some of the abilities of this mysterious woman weren't something a Sword Immortal could achieve. Every time they thought of this, they broke out in cold sweat. Because this mysterious woman might not just be a Sword Immortal, she might even be above it. Of course, the reason they'd chosen Yi Xian was because of Yi Xian's original intention of establishing the academy. Yi Xian paid attention to academics and his country. This was exactly what they needed, because what they needed to do was to spread academics and spread their own Confucian ideology. If Zhonglan Academy grew bigger and bigger, its influence would naturally grow bigger and bigger in the future. At that time, Confucian ideology and academics would be able to be spread even more. Another point was that Yi Xian was strong enough. Without strength, without potential, everything else was just bullshit. On the field, Yi Xian was silent. Mo Yuan and Mo Xian quietly waited for Yi Xian's reply. After a while, Yi Xian said, "I don't understand Confucianism." "You don't have to worry about that," said Mo Yuan with a smile. "You can fire us at any time if you feel that there's something wrong with our Confucian Tao in the future. As for you joining my Confucian Tao, it is just a formality. In the future you can join any faction. As for my Confucian Tao spokesperson, it is just a title. There is no restriction. It is just that in the future, when the two of us use Azure Billow Academy to promote Confucian Tao, we will use your name. Of course, the two of us will do our best to protect Azure Billow Academy and you." On the side, Feng Lan suddenly said, "To put it simply, it is equivalent to us cooperating. There is no superior and subordinate relationship. Everyone will help each other and cooperate for a win-win situation." Yi Xian smiled. "In that case, I naturally have no problem with it." Hearing this, Mo Yuan and Feng Lan both smiled. Mo Yuan handed the box to Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't stand on ceremony. He accepted the box and said, "How do I use this?" Mo Yuan said, "The 12 golden men need to be activated with spiritual energy. Each activation requires at least 100,000 top-grade spirit stones, and it can only be maintained for a quarter of an hour at most." Yi Xian was shocked. 100,000 top-grade spirit stones? Only for a quarter of an hour? Are you kidding me? Mo Yuan smiled bitterly. "Although it is a bit expensive, the effect is excellent. If you have enough top-grade spirit stones, these 12 golden men can even kill an ordinary Dharma realm powerhouse." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly, and there was a trace of helplessness in his smile. He had more than 1 million top-grade spirit stones on him, and if he used them to activate the 12 golden men, he would run out in one go. Most importantly, it could only be maintained for a quarter of an hour. It was too short, too short. It was simply burning money. Although this thing was very good, he really didn't dare to use it casually. Using it once would make him poor. Mo Yuan said, "There is one more thing. The two of us can't help you openly. We have some grievances with us. If we help you, it might cause some trouble for you. So we can't help you openly. However, we can still help you in secret. Yi Xian smiled. In that case, I will thank you in advance. Mo Yuan smiled lightly. Mutual benefit. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and said, Do you remember State Preceptor Lu? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. Mo Yuan said solemnly, This person is the successor of military Dao. This time, the Great Cloud Empire is probably the opportunity she has been waiting for. As far as we know, the person she should choose is Her Highness the Ninth Princess. Since you have returned to the imperial capital, you can go look for her. Perhaps you will have a good harvest. Lu Jioge. Yi Xian nodded. All right. Seniors, after I leave, I will trouble you two to take care of everything in Kanglin Academy. Mo Yuan gently stroked his beard. It is my duty. You must be careful on your trip to Mizar City. Yi Xian slightly nodded and bid farewell to the two. Watching Yi Xian leave, Mo Yuan softly said, He may be our only hope in Azure Firmament World. Feng Lan solemnly said, Unfortunately, he has too many troubles. Karaki Academy, Dark World, Great Cloud Empire. So annoying. Mo Yuan indifferently said, It doesn't matter. Although we can't openly take action, it doesn't mean we can't help him in other aspects. He is our only hope in Azure Firmament World. No matter what, we have to give it our all. Inside Kanglin Palace, Yi Xian, Jianji and Bai Zhe sat around the table. On the table there were 4 dishes and a soup. After Yi Xian finished eating, he put the bowl on the table. I will leave with them tomorrow at noon. Bai Zhe said, I want to go with you. Jianji put down his chopsticks. Together. Yi Xian glanced at the two. When he was about to speak, Bai Zhe suddenly said, Bandit Yi, this is the last battle. Either we come back together or we die together in Mizar City. Yi Xian was silent. Bai Zhe said again, Staying here is a kind of torture. Let us face everything together, okay? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, we will leave together tomorrow at noon. Bai Zhe grinned. Have another bowl, ha. Jianji glanced at Yi Xian but did not speak. After dinner it was night time. Outside the palace, there was no moon or stars. The earth was dark. Yi Xian sat in front of the stone steps, a small wooden figure in his hand. Yiling. Yi Xian gently stroked the small wooden figure in his hand. His sister Yiling had been gone for some time. How was she doing? He was naturally worried. The divine central plains. Yi Xian's right hand slowly tightened around the small wooden figure. He had to work harder. Northern region of the divine central plains. Tens of thousands of kilometers in the northern region, it was cold all year round. Thousands of kilometers of ice and snow drifted down. In the center of the northern region there was a palace, an ice palace. Inside the palace, countless women were gathered in front of an ice platform. A little girl sat cross-legged on the ice platform. She wasn't very old, only around the age of 13 or 14, and she seemed quite immature. Her hair was icy cold, and strands of formidable aura were ceaselessly emanating from her. However, this aura hadn't even spread out before it was obstructed by a thin barrier of ice. After an unknown period of time, the little girl's aura suddenly rose explosively, and it grew stronger and stronger to the point that the barrier of ice was on the verge of being unable to withstand it. The expressions of everyone here changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated in unison. A beautiful woman clenched her fists tightly while anxiety filled her eyes. Don't break through. You must not break through. It's not a good thing for you if you attain the Dharma realm right now. Suppress it, suppress it. The little girl's aura was still rising madly in the distance, and there was a small wooden figure in her hand. The kingdom of Jiang. Late at night. Yi Xian hadn't rested. He'd arrived at a bamboo forest outside the kingdom of Jiang instead. There was an exquisite bamboo house within the bamboo forest. The bamboo house was brightly lit with candles. Yi Xian arrived in front of the bamboo house and the door suddenly opened. He was slightly startled, but he didn't think too much about it and entered the bamboo house. Inside the bamboo house, Lu Jioge was sitting in a wheelchair with a thick blanket covering her knees. She was holding a scroll in her hand. Seeing Yi Xian, Lu Jioge smiled slightly. Long time no see. I'm ready. Can we go now? Yi Xian was stunned. You know why I'm here? Lu Jioge smiled. Of course. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, You want to go with me? Lu Jioge still had a smile on her face. Are you unwilling? Yi Xian walked in front of Lu Jioge. Why? Lu Jioge shook her head. I have no ill intentions towards you, nor towards the kingdom of Jiang. Is that enough? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. Enough. Lu Jioga's lips curled up slightly. Then let's go. Yi Xian asked. To Tsanglan Academy? Lu Jioga shook her head. To Mizar City. Yi Xian said. We'll leave at daybreak. Lu Jioga looked straight at Yi Xian. Leave now. Leave immediately. It'll be too late after daybreak. Yi Xian frowned. Why? Lu Jioga pointed with a finger. A piece of paper flew in front of Yi Xian. When he saw the contents of the paper, Yi Xian's expression changed. He turned and left. There was only one line on the paper. The Black Flame Army has arrived. The Black Flame Army. Yi Xian had naturally heard of this army that caused the surrounding countries to turn pale at the mere mention of it. Jiang Jiu and the soldiers of Mizar City would definitely not be able to stop them. Not long after Yi Xian left, he suddenly stopped. He turned and walked back to the bamboo house. He walked in front of Lu Jioga. Why aren't you leaving? Lu Jioga said indifferently. Can I leave? Yi Xian, Lu Jioga said. Uncle Chen has gone to handle some matters for me. Now I'm alone. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. With that, he walked to Lu Jioga's side. He carried Lu Jioga and ran. After running out of the bamboo house, Yi Xian sprinted all the way. In his arms, Lu Jioga suddenly said. I asked you to push my wheelchair. I didn't ask you to carry me. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then he said. What did you say? The wind is strong. I didn't hear you clearly. Lu Jioga. Chapter 164. In the dark, Yi Xian carried Lu Jioga and ran wildly. The Black Flame Army. Yi Xian was naturally shocked when he heard the news. The Black Flame Army was one of the trump cards of the Great Cloud Empire. It was a cavalry army that the Great Cloud Empire nurtured with all its resources. These people were elites selected from various military camps. After being selected, the Great Cloud Empire would secretly nurture them. It could be said that the combat strength of these soldiers was extraordinarily terrifying. There was a saying in Qingzhou, who can compete with the Black Flame Army? Now that the Great Cloud Empire dispatched the Black Flame Army, it was obvious that they were blatantly trying to destroy the Jiang country. Yi Xian sped up and soon arrived at Azure Billow Academy with Lu Jioga. After handing Lu Jioga over to Jian, he immediately gathered the students of Azure Billow Academy. In front of Yi Xian there were more than 40 students and 30 demonic beasts. The demonic beasts he brought from Mount Mang got along well with the students under Bai Zai's guidance. After all, these demonic beasts had their own intelligence. In front of the crowd, Yi Xian suddenly said, We might not return after this trip. Are you ready? Ready. The 40 people roared in unison. Yi Xian nodded. Let's go. Soon Yi Xian and the rest rushed down Mount Jishuan and disappeared into the vast mountains. In the Jiang country's imperial palace, the monarch of the Jiang country, Jiang Yuan, stood in front of the main hall. He wore a golden armor and had a long saber at his waist. In front of him were 3,000 fully equipped royal guards. Jiang Yuan glanced at the soldiers. I've received news that the Black Flame Army of the Great Cloud Empire has arrived at Mizar City. Are you afraid? Black Flame Army. Everyone in the surroundings instantly glanced at each other when they heard this. Who in the entire Qingzhou didn't know about this army? Back then, they had destroyed a country with just 100 people. At this moment, Jiang Yuan said, Yi Guosher has led all the students of Azure Billow Academy to Mizar City. Yi Guosher. Hearing these 3 words, the crowd burst into an uproar. A soldier suddenly roared, With State Scholar Yi here, why should we be afraid of the Black Flame Army? We are willing to head to Mizar City and fight alongside State Scholar Yi. We are willing to go to Mizar City. In the battlefield, thousands of elite imperial guards roared in unison. Their voices rumbled like thunder and shook the clouds. At this moment, a cloud ship suddenly arrived above the Jiang country's imperial palace. Soon, the cloud ship slowly descended and landed not far away from everyone. Jiang Yuan unsheathed the saber at his waist. Board the ship. Several thousand soldiers boarded the cloud ship, and so did Jiang Yuan. Not long after, the cloud ship rose into the air. Jiang Yuan looked down from the cloud ship and looked at the familiar palace before him with a complicated expression. Because this might be the last time he would see the palace he had lived in for decades, in next to no time, the cloud ship vanished into the night. In the nurturing heart hall of the imperial palace of Jiang country, Jiang Yu sat on the ground, beside him was a little black dog, and in front of him was the 5th floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Jiang Yu gently stroked the black puppy beside him. What are our chances of winning this battle? The 5th floor master fell silent. Jiang Yu smiled, Please speak your mind. The fifth floor master said, less than 20%. Jiang Yu asked softly, what if that sword immortal senior joins the battle? The fifth floor master turned to look outside the palace with a complicated expression. If she joins the battle, things will become even more complicated. Right now it was still a matter between the younger generation. Although it was already a national war, there were still no Dharma realm experts. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. If that sword immortal were to join the battle, it would mean that this was no longer a battle between the younger generation. At that time, the ones dying would no longer be ordinary people but Dharma realm experts. The entire Azure province would be disrupted. And if she didn't join the battle, would Yi Xian and the rest be able to stop it? It would be difficult. Jiang Yu and the fifth floor master's eyes were filled with deep worry. The news of Azure Billow Academy students and Jiang Yuan's imperial guards heading to Mizar City quickly spread throughout the Jiang country. Even the king had personally joined the battle. At this moment, everyone in the Jiang country was aware of the severity of the situation. It could be said that Mizar City was destroyed and the Jiang country was doomed. In an instant, countless martial artists of the Jiang country spontaneously rushed to Mizar City. Some were afraid of death but some were not. Some were unpatriotic and some were patriotic. In a faraway mountain range, a group of cavalrymen ran wildly. Wherever they passed, the ground would burn with black flames. There were not many people in this group, only about 100 or so. These cavalrymen were all wearing dark golden armor and dark golden helmets. Their faces could not be seen because they were all wearing a ghost mask. Each of them held a dark golden spear in their hands. The spear was much longer than an ordinary spear, and its tip was extremely sharp. The tip of the spear was extremely thin, and it flickered with a cold flame. Each of them had a dark golden longbow slung across their shoulders, and each of them had a quiver on their backs. There were only 10 arrows in the quiver and they were extremely long. The tips of the arrows were prismatic and there were even hooks on them. Apart from that, on the left and right sides of each of their waists, there were 2 short sabers. They were shorter than ordinary sabers but slightly longer than daggers. These equipment were all bright rank lower grade. All bright rank lower grade. In other words, each of their equipment alone was worth at least 1 billion gold coins. The most eye-catching thing was the horses they were riding on. These were not ordinary horses. These horses were much larger than ordinary horses. They were completely black and there was a thick layer of dark scales on their ankles. Moreover, they were all wearing dark golden horse armor. When they ran, the ground beneath their feet would burn with black flames. This was because they were too fast. Black flame horse. This was a type of demonic beast that did not exist in the Qingzhou province. The Great Cloud Empire had spent a lot of money to purchase these demonic beasts from the Divine Central Continent. These demonic beasts were currently the fastest demonic beasts in the Qingzhou province. Once they started running, even a peak Divine Unity Realm expert would not be able to catch up. The Black Flame Army. This was an army that the Great Cloud Empire had spent countless resources to nurture. So far they had never been defeated in the Qingzhou province. This time they were going to conquer the Jiang country. Mizar City. At this moment, the entire Mizar City was in a state of emergency. Fortunately, the people were still calm. After all, the 9th princess of the Jiang country was here. This meant that the Jiang country did not want to give up this city, nor could they. Once the city was breached, the 100,000 soldiers of the Chu country would attack the imperial capital of the Jiang country in less than half a day. This was the last line of defense of the Jiang country. On the city wall, Jiang Jiu was still as valiant and formidable in her silver armor. However, there was an unconcealable look of exhaustion in her eyes. She had not rested since she arrived at Mizar City. Looking at the Chu country's army in the distance, Jiang Jiu's eyes were cold. She knew that the time for the decisive battle had arrived. This battle concerned her life and death, as well as the lives of countless people in the Jiang country. At this moment, Jiang Jiu's pupils suddenly constricted because the Chu country's cavalrymen in the distance had suddenly moved. They're here. Please continue to the next page. On the city wall, countless soldiers were on guard. The Chu country's cavalrymen did not charge. Instead, they slowly advanced toward Mizar City. When 100,000 cavalrymen advanced together, the entire ground began to tremble. Looking at the dense black army, the atmosphere on the entire city wall became heavy. Very soon, the Chu country's cavalrymen arrived at a distance of 10,000 feet from Mizar City. They stopped and did not send any infantry to attack the city, as if they were waiting for something. In front of this group of cavalrymen were Li Mu of Kuraki Academy and the Mistress of the Dark World. Looking at Mizar City in the distance, Li Mu said indifferently, "In at most an hour the Black Flame Army will arrive. At that time, with 100,000 troops coupled with your Dao soldiers of the Dark World, it should be a piece of cake to take down this city." The Mistress of the Dark World said in a low voice, "Then who will deal with Yi Xian?" Li Mu laughed coldly. "Don't worry. Other than Li Mulin and that archer, there is another person who has already rushed over from the Divine Central Plains. At that time, with the three of them attacking together and your Dao soldiers of the Dark World, it should not be difficult to kill him. Even if it is not enough, isn't there still 100,000 troops and the Black Flame Army? With so many people, can he still ascend to the heavens?" The Mistress of the Dark World shook her head. "What if he escapes?" Li Mu smiled and said, "Don't worry, he will not escape." The Mistress of the Dark World looked at Li Mu. Li Mu laughed coldly and said, "Although this person is a great enemy of Kuraki Academy, he is not someone who is afraid of death. And this person is very loyal, he will not escape. He definitely will not escape." His words were filled with confidence. The Mistress of the Dark World said again, "What if that Sword Immortal attacks?" "Sword Immortal attacks." Li Mu's eyes narrowed and his hands slowly clenched. "Sword Immortal attacks." Li Mu laughed coldly. "If she attacks, then she is the one who broke the rules first." At this point, his lips curled into a savage smile. "Then even kill her. It is just a price to pay." The Mistress of the Dark World was silent. "Price?" The reason why Kuraki Academy and Dark World did not fight to the death with that Sword Immortal was because they wanted to leave a way out. Because if they fought to the death, everyone would be hurt at their foundations. Even though some people from Kuraki Academy and Dark World had died, this was only a small loss to them. Because core existences like 10,000 Dharma Realm did not die. As long as there were not too many experts of this level dying, they would not be hurt at their foundations. This was also the reason why they were willing to follow the rules set by the mysterious woman. For Dark World and Kuraki Academy, today's battle was also the last battle. In the battlefield, the two armies faced each other, but it was very quiet. Both sides were very quiet. On the city walls of Mizar City, countless soldiers were waiting. There was seriousness in their eyes, but more than that, there was determination. There was no way out. Since there was no way out, then naturally they had to fight. Jiang Jio's expression was very calm. At this point, she had already thought of all the possible outcomes. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. At this moment, Li Mu suddenly looked to the right. A moment later, his lips curled up. "They are about to arrive. We can attack now." As his voice fell, an angry roar suddenly rang out from the 100,000 cavalry. "Attack!" In an instant, countless infantrymen charged out from the two sides of the cavalry towards Mizar City. On top of Mizar City, Jiang Jio slowly closed her eyes. After a moment of silence, she suddenly opened her eyes and roared, "Fight to the death! Fight to the death!" On the city walls, countless people roared in unison. P.S. 2 chapters. These few days the updates were not stable. Because I followed Lu Sun Academy to Guangzhou for an interview, I did not have the time to update. I hope everyone can understand. If not, come to Guangzhou and beat me up. Come on. End of this chapter. Chapter 165. A battle to the death. For all the soldiers on the city walls, this battle concerned their life and death. For the entire Jiang country, this battle concerned their survival. If they lost this battle, their country would perish. On the city walls, Jiang Jio held a spear in her right hand with an expressionless face. Soon, the Chu soldiers arrived at the city walls. Jiang Jio took a step forward, waved his left hand and roared, "Fire!" As his voice fell, countless arrows poured down from the city walls like a torrential rain. In an instant, miserable screams rang out from below the city walls. But at this moment, many screams came from above the city walls. Jiang Jio suddenly turned his head. At this moment, shadowy figures had appeared all over the city walls. They appeared quickly and disappeared just as quickly. Every time they appeared, a soldier from the state of Jiang would fall to the ground. Dark World Dao soldiers. The sudden appearance of the assassins caused a wave of panic on the city walls. Seeing this scene, Jiang Jio roared, "Don't panic. Death servants, move out." Absolutely not. Beside Jiang Jio, a general quickly said, "Your Highness, the death servants are responsible for your safety. They must not leave, Your Highness." Jiang Jio turned to look at the general, her beautiful eyes filled with anger. "My life is a life, but the lives of the soldiers are not?" All death servants move out immediately. After a moment of silence, countless men in black holding daggers suddenly appeared on the city walls. Soon these men in black flew around the city walls. The death servants of the Jiang country. This was a group of death servants that the Jiang country had meticulously nurtured. They were responsible for protecting the royal family. Although they were not as strong as the assassins from the Dark World, they were not weak either. With their numbers, they could still restrain the assassins from the Dark World. At this moment, Jiang Jiu suddenly turned to the wall and looked down. Not far away, a man holding a spear was running towards the city gates. First on the Qingzhou martial roll, Li Mulin. Li Mulin was extremely fast. He dodged left and right, easily dodging the arrows on the city walls. Seeing that Li Mulin's target was the city gates, Jiang Jiu's expression changed drastically. If the city walls were broken, the Jiang country soldiers would not be able to defend against the Chu country's army without the city walls to rely on. At this moment, Li Mulin suddenly stopped. With a shake of his right hand, he thrust his spear forward. Clang! At the tip of the spear was a flying dagger. The flying dagger spun violently as it pushed against the spear, causing sparks to fly. Li Mulin twisted his right hand, causing the spear in his hand to tremble violently. Bang! The saber was sent flying. Li Mulin raised his head and looked at the city wall. On the city wall, a man was also looking at him. Ink cloud rise. Mo Yunqi stood on the city wall, looking down at Li Mulin with an expressionless face. In his right palm there was a flying dagger. The dagger was only 3 inches long, and the tip of the dagger emitted a piercing cold light. Below the city wall, Li Mulin retracted his gaze and continued forward. However, just as he took a step forward, a flying dagger suddenly flew out from the city wall, as fast as lightning. The next moment, a cold light appeared in front of Li Mulin. Li Mulin's reaction was extremely fast. The moment the flying knife flew out, the spear in his hand had already stabbed out. Bang! A flying knife was sent flying. After sending the flying dagger flying with one strike, Li Mulin suddenly leaped and arrived in front of the city gate. Countless soldiers of Chu parted to the sides. Li Mulin increased his speed as he gathered a powerful force around his body. Spear force. At this moment he raised his power to the limit. This spear would definitely break the city gate. Seeing this scene, Mo Yunqi, who was on the city wall, revealed a sinister smile. Without the slightest hesitation, he leaped and fiercely smashed down from the city wall with a large metal rod in his hand. Li Mulin did not care about Mo Yunqi because he felt that his speed was faster, and he could break the city the moment Mo Yunqi landed. However, he underestimated Mo Yunqi's speed. The moment he jumped off the city wall, Mo Yunqi's speed suddenly increased. Feeling Mo Yunqi's speed increase, Li Mulin's expression changed drastically. The spear in his hand that was originally going to stab towards the city gate changed its trajectory, and blocked upwards. Bang! Following a heavy sound of impact, Li Mulin was already 10 feet away. He had just stopped when suddenly, a flying dagger appeared in front of him without any warning. Too fast. Li Mulin's pupils constricted slightly, and he dodged to the side. The flying dagger passed by his nose. In the next moment he suddenly turned around and stabbed out with his spear. The spear was like a dragon and a cold light appeared. This spear directly stabbed the metal rod that was smashing towards him. The spear and rod shook violently, and Mo Yunqi retreated explosively by over 30 m. Mo Yunqi had just stopped when the ground beneath his feet directly collapsed. At the same time, the web between his thumb and forefinger had split open, and fresh blood flowed out and slowly flowed down the metal rod. Li Mulin glanced at the distant Mo Yunqi, and then he tapped the tip of his foot lightly before his figure suddenly shot out explosively. In the next moment, a sharp sound of something tearing resounded. Li Mulin stopped because the spear in his hand had stabbed empty air. He raised his head and looked towards the distance, and Mo Yunqi had suddenly retreated to the city gate. What swift speed! Li Mulin's eyes carried a trace of seriousness because Mo Yunqi's speed was truly too swift to the point it exceeded his expectations. Mo Yunqi didn't attack. He glanced at the surroundings and there were already scaling ladders set up all around him. Countless soldiers were charging up the city walls like madmen, whereas some people didn't need scaling ladders at all. All of these people had attained the hovering realm, and they could rely on the walls to fly up the city walls. The sounds of battle had already resounded from the top of the city walls. Now, if even the city gates were breached, then Mizar city would really be finished. Because once the 100,000 cavalrymen from the Chu kingdom were allowed to charge into the city, then the soldiers within the city would be utterly unable to stop these cavalrymen. The city couldn't be breached. Mo Yunchi held the iron rod tightly in his right hand. As soon as he exerted force, his wound split open once more and even more blood flowed out. Mo Yunchi stared fixedly at the distant Li Mulin. Looks like I have to fucking be a hero for once. Meanwhile, Li Mulin suddenly vanished on the spot. Mo Yunchi's expression became ferocious. He could flee, but this time he couldn't flee because the city gates were right behind him. Mo Yunchi's figure suddenly soared into the sky, and his figure started spinning like a top in midair. In an instant, countless rod images flashed into appearance. Meanwhile, Li Mulin arrived with his spear in hand, and he pointed it straight at Mo Yunchi. His spear strike carried the might of a thunderbolt. In midair, Mo Yunchi suddenly roared furiously, "Rod technique." As soon as his voice resounded, the rod smashed down, and behind the rod were countless overlapping rod images. Rod technique. This was the rod technique that old Manji had passed down to him. As soon as the spear and rod collided, bang! An ear-piercing sound of a heavy strike suddenly resounded. Mo Yunchi's entire body flew out, and finally landed heavily on the city gates not far away. The city gates trembled violently and he smashed into the ground, causing the ground to instantly crack. As for Li Mulin, he also retreated explosively, and this time he retreated more than 100 feet. In front of him there was a 100-feet-long ravine. This was the result of him retreating with his feet. It was rubbed raw. Mo Yunchi slowly crawled up. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then raised his head to look at Li Mulin, who was not far away. The latter was also looking at him. Mo Yunchi grinned, "Motherf *Ker, come at me." Li Mulin's eyes narrowed slightly, and just as he was about to make another move, a figure suddenly sprinted over from behind him. Li Mulin turned around to look. It was a man who was around the age of 20, and he wore tight-fitting plain clothes. His long hair was coiled around his neck, and his gaze was icy cold. Moreover, he held a large saber in his right hand. The body of the saber was wide, and its blade was extremely thin. There were 5 black iron rings tied to the back of the saber, and the hilt of the saber was covered in numerous markings. These markings emanated strands of light red light, and they coiled around the man's right hand. The man just charged towards the city gates with the saber in hand. Everywhere he passed, the ground that the saber came into contact with collapsed inch by inch, and a monstrous aura assaulted the face. The soldiers in the surroundings retreated in unison and didn't dare approach him. How formidable! Li Mulin's pupils constricted slightly when he saw this person, and his eyes were filled with a solemn expression. He's from the Central Divine Prefecture. Mo Yunchi stared fixedly at the man who was charging towards him. Actually, he wanted to flee in his heart, because he'd suffered a heavy injury when he fought Li Mulin head-on just now. Now, when he saw the aura of the man with the saber, he was very clearly aware that he was unable to resist the man. If he resisted it head-on, then it was very likely that he would die. Mo Yunchi suddenly roared furiously. "Flee my ass. I'm fucking from Darkwave Academy. I'm Bandit Ye's brother. I can't fucking lose face. Come fight me." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he held the black rod with both hands as he charged towards the man. Profound energy surged madly within Mo Yunchi's body, and countless strands of profound energy surged like tide water into the black rod in his hand. At this moment, the aura of the rod had converged within his body as well. However, the aura of his rod was extremely inferior to the aura of the man with the saber. However, there wasn't a trace of fear in Mo Yunchi's eyes, and his speed grew faster and faster. Just like that, the two of them grew closer and closer under the gazes of countless people. 15M, 10M, 6M, 3M. The man with the saber slashed down. Mo Yunchi held the rod with both hands as he smashed it down. A moment of silence ensued. The long rod instantly shattered, and the saber slashed straight towards Mo Yunchi's head. Mo Yunchi's pupils constricted, and his figure flashed backwards, dodging this fatal strike by a hair's breadth. The saber directly sank into the ground, but the next moment, the man with the saber suddenly let go of the saber, and then he charged forward, and directly kneed Mo Yunchi in the abdomen. Mo Yunchi's eyes widened, and his entire body was sent flying backwards. This time, he flew for a distance of a few hundred feet, and finally smashed heavily onto the city gate of Mizar City in the distance. Bang! The city gate shook violently, and then, Mo Yunchi smashed onto the ground and countless clouds of dust rose. Not far away, the man with the saber opened his right hand, and the saber behind him suddenly flew up, and then appeared in his hand. The man carried the saber and walked towards Mo Yunchi, who was at the city wall. Mo Yunchi crawled up, and blood flowed continuously from the corner of his mouth, and his body was in a tearing pain. Mo Yunchi stared at the man with the saber who was walking towards him from afar, and he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. "Damn it, Bandit Yi, don't tell me you're waiting for me to die before coming?" As he spoke, he looked around and did not see Yi Xian's figure. The man in the distance was getting closer and closer. The corner of Mo Yunchi's mouth twitched. "Bandit Yi. Brother Yi. Big brother. Dear brother. Save me. I really don't want to die." Genius 1 second to remember website. Mobile version website. Chapter 166. Afraid of death? Who wasn't afraid of death? Not to mention Mo Yunchi, even Yi Xian was afraid of death, or rather he didn't want to die. In this world there were too many things to worry about and too many wonderful things. If one could live, who would want to die? But if he had to die, then there was nothing he could do. Just like this moment. Mo Yunchi could originally escape, but he didn't choose to escape. His thoughts were to block for as long as he could and try to buy as much time as possible for Yi Xian. Because once the city was breached, the cavalry would charge, and at that time, it would be a destructive matter for Mizar City. Mo Yunchi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His expression turned malevolent as he walked towards the man with the big saber. The saber-wielding man's figure suddenly trembled. In the next moment he appeared directly above Mo Yunchi's head. In the blink of an eye, his saber slashed down at Mo Yunchi. As the saber fell, an ear-piercing tearing sound rang out. Mo Yunchi's eyes were cold. He didn't block the saber. Instead, he opened his right hand and a flying saber flew out from his palm. Block the knife? He knew very well that he couldn't block it anymore. Thus he chose to exchange a life for a life. If it really didn't work out, he would settle for the next best thing. Exchanging a life for an injury was also fine. That was all he could do. Just as the saber was about 10 centimeters away from Mo Yun's head, it suddenly stopped. This was because a sword was firmly pressed against the blade of the saber. This sword had blocked all of the saber's power. As for Mo Yunchi's flying knife, it was unable to cut into the man's abdomen. Underneath the man's clothes was a pitch-black armor. This armor forcefully blocked the flying knife. The man wielding the saber pressed forward with his right hand. Bang! The sword was sent flying, but in the next moment, it flew back again. The saber-wielding man frowned. Holding the saber forward was everything. Bang! The sword was sent flying again, but the saber-wielding man was also forced back a good 100 feet. The man raised his head and looked into the distance. There, a man was slowly walking over. Yi Xian. The moment she saw Yi Xian, all the soldiers on the city wall were in an uproar, and countless angry roars resounded from the city wall. Morale skyrocketed. On the other hand, when Jiang Jiu, who was in battle, saw Yi Xian, a wisp of a smile appeared on his bloodied face. Here it comes. He came. Accompanying Yi Xian were Ji Anji, Bai Zhe, and all the students of Zhonglan Academy. These students had already rushed up the city walls and were fighting with the soaring sky realm experts of Chu country. Ordinary soldiers might not be able to defeat these high sky realm experts, but Zhonglan Academy students were not afraid. Among them, the weakest was at the high sky realm. On the other side, when the two of them saw Yi Xian, the corners of Li Mu's mouth curled up into a cold smile. You finally appeared? Before Yi Xian did not appear, he was still a little worried. He was not worried that Yi Xian would escape, but he was worried that Yi Xian would do something else. Beside him, the mistress of the world asked, "Attack?" Li Mu shook his head. "Let your men check the surroundings first. This person isn't stupid. He might have a backup plan. No matter what, it's best for us to be careful." The mistress of the dark world nodded and left. Li Mu looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. His eyes were filled with coldness and killing intent. In order to deal with Yi Xian, Zhonglan Academy had paid a huge price. This time, if they did not succeed, they would die trying. Yi Xian walked to Mo Yunchi's side. Mo Yunchi collapsed. Yi Xian supported Mo Yunchi and placed a golden sword pill into Mo Yunchi's mouth. Mo Yunchi looked at Yi Xian. "If you came a little later, we can only be brothers in our next life." Yi Xian patted Mo Yunchi's shoulder and said softly, "Leave the rest to me." After that, he sent Mo Yunchi to Bai Zhe, who was on the city wall. Then he turned around and pointed. A few dozen feet away, a dark world Dao soldier's head was instantly pierced by this sword light. In the next moment, the sword light flashed like a bolt of lightning. This chapter is not over, please flip the page. After that, a few dozen feet away, the heads of 5 to 6 Chu country soldiers flew off. Fresh blood sprayed out like a fountain. Instant kill. Yi Xian's flying sword was too fast. The Dark World Dao soldiers and Chu country's Levitation Realm soldiers could not stop his flying sword at all. Soon the soldiers fled from the city wall. Soon there were only Jiang country's soldiers left on the city wall. Below, the Chu country soldiers who were attacking the city also retreated for some reason. They retreated very quickly. In less than 15 minutes they all retreated, leaving behind a ground full of corpses. The city wall was also covered with corpses. The place was filled with the pungent smell of blood. In the distance, Li Mu suddenly came to the city wall. On his left was the man with the big saber. The man was expressionless. The big saber in his hand kept spinning. Every time it spun, there would be waves of saber light. On Li Mu's right was Li Mulin. Apart from that, there was a man with a longbow behind him. He was also a monster from Qingzhou. Li Mu arrived at the city wall. He looked up at Yi Xian and he sneered, "Yi Xian you." Yi Xian suddenly leaped down from the city wall. After he arrived on the ground, he walked over to Li Mu and looked him in the eyes. "Shut up. I don't want to hear it." As he spoke, he looked at the man with the big saber by Li Mu's side. "You hit my brother? Who gave you the gall to do that?" As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed at the man with the big saber, and a sword flew out from within him. In the distance, the man's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward with his saber in hand, and then he suddenly slashed down. Bang! The saber trembled violently, and he retreated explosively. Meanwhile, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. The man's pupils constricted, and he slashed forward with his saber again. The force of the saber was peerlessly overbearing. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword stabbed the saber. It was just a simple stab, but the sword contained an extremely powerful force. Bang! As an ear-piercing sound of metal colliding resounded, the man with the big saber instantly retreated over 30 m. As soon as he stopped, a flying sword had already slashed towards him, and he raised his saber to block it. Bang! The saber shook violently, and the man and his saber were pushed back over 30 m again. At this moment, 2 deep cuts had appeared between the man's thumb and index finger, and blood was flowing out. The man raised his head to look at Yi Xian, and in the next moment Yi Xian suddenly vanished. One sword strike to decide life and death. When he felt how terrifying this sword strike was, the man's expression changed drastically. At this moment he didn't dare to hold back at all. He held the saber with both hands and spun on the spot. In an instant, countless saber lights shook and instantly drowned Yi Xian and his sword strike. After a moment of silence, a ray of sword light suddenly erupted from within the saber lights. Bang! The saber lights were instantly shattered, and the powerful force instantly shook the man with the big saber and forced him to retreat repeatedly. However, he hadn't even taken a few steps back when a sword was pressed against the center of his forehead. Flying sword. Yi Xian was still a few meters away from the man with the big saber, but the sword was already pressed against the man's forehead. At this moment, his sword control technique had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Yi Xian slowly walked towards the man with the big saber. "You think my brother is someone you can bully?" As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand. The exquisite spirit sword pierced through the man's forehead. A stream of blood splattered from the back of the man's head. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed drastically, especially Li Mu, who was nearby. At this moment, his eyes were filled with shock, because he realized that Yi Xian's strength was much stronger than before. How long had it been? Was he a devil? Li Mu looked at Yi Xian, and at this moment he finally panicked. The speed at which Yi Xian's strength grew was way too fast. He had to admit that if this continued, Yi Xian might become a sword master within 3 years, or even less. This was too terrifying. Thinking to this point, this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Because Li Mu was even more determined in his thoughts. Yi Xian must die. At this time, sue for peace? That was something that was simply impossible. Li Mu looked at the mistress of the dark world beside him. "Be ready." The mistress of the dark world nodded slightly and disappeared silently. In the distance, Yi Xian walked to the man's corpse, and with a wave of his right hand, the machete on the ground appeared in his hand. High-grade clear-grade spirit weapon. This machete could be sold for at least 150 million gold coins, maybe even more. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. This was not a small amount of wealth. Although it wasn't a sword, he could use it to exchange for a clear-grade sword. After putting away the machete, he waved his right hand, and the storage ring on the man's finger flew into his hand. In the storage ring, there were more than 100 million gold coins, more than 200,000 top-grade spirit stones, and a lot of miscellaneous things. Although there weren't many good things, they weren't too bad either, and could be exchanged for more than 10 million gold coins. Yi Xian put away the storage ring and looked at the corpse on the ground. The more monstrous a person was, the more wealth he had on him. On second thought, if someone killed him, the other party could also obtain a large amount of wealth. In this cruel world, killing and robbing was always the fastest way to get rich. As if he thought of something, Yi Xian turned to look at Li Mulin, who was not far away. Li Mulin squinted his eyes, and his right hand tightly held onto the spear. Yi Xian slowly walked towards Li Mulin, and Li Mulin stared at Yi Xian. "I will leave and never step into the country of Jiang again." Yi Xian stopped, and Li Mulin said again, "I didn't kill your friend." As he spoke, he flicked his finger and a storage ring flew to Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at it and there were 200 million gold coins in it. 200 million. Li Mulin looked at Yi Xian. "I only came here to seek wealth and I have no enmity with you. This storage ring will end all the grievances between us, how about it?" Yi Xian asked, "Why?" Li Mulin said, "It's not worth it and it's not too late to retreat now. Of course it's up to you." Yi Xian put away the storage ring. "Let's go." In fact, if Li Mulin escaped into the Chu army, he couldn't do anything to him. After all, he hadn't reached the level of fighting an army of 100,000 by himself. Li Mulin did this to end the grievances, and he didn't want him to protect Li Mulin and his family in the future. Just as Li Mulin said, he wanted to end all the grievances. Li Mulin took a deep glance at Yi Xian, and then he turned around and left. Nearby, Li Mu suddenly ridiculed. The dignified young master of the #1 clan in Pine Prefecture actually admitted defeat just like that? Li Mulin glanced at Li Mu. Admitted defeat? Yes, I admitted defeat. I just couldn't defeat him. There's nothing bad about recognizing your own strength. As soon as he finished speaking, the spear in his hand suddenly trembled violently, and then it howled. Li Mu's expression instantly became unsightly when he saw this. A breakthrough in his mental state. Li Mulin was stunned, and then he roared with laughter in the next moment. "So that's how it is, so that's how it is. Ah. Yi Xian, when we meet again in the Central Divine Prefecture, I'll definitely fight you." As soon as he finished speaking, he'd vanished into the distance. Li Mulin. Yi Xian fell silent. There were always many geniuses and monstrous geniuses in this world. Perhaps he would be a completely different person the next time they met. Right at this moment, the ground suddenly started trembling. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. A moment later, they looked towards the distance, and they saw a group of cavalrymen galloping swiftly towards them. Everywhere they passed, the ground was covered in black flames. The Black Flame Army. The countenances of all the soldiers in Mizar City instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. Who could fight against the Black Flame Army? P.S. I didn't have any time to write in the last 2 days. I've been observing and learning, and I even had to write a summary. I'm truly sorry. I haven't been updating well in the last few days, and I'm very sorry for that. I don't ask for your understanding, I just ask for your monthly votes. Thank you. Lastly, I'll allow all of you to curse me for the next few days. Right, we're all civilized people, so you can't curse me with vulgarities. Whoever curses is a puppy. End of this chapter. Chapter 167. Black Flame Army. This was a mysterious army that had countless legends in Qingzhou. At this moment it was no longer a legend. It had truly appeared before everyone's eyes. Everyone was looking at this cavalry unit. Yi Xian was also looking at this cavalry unit. He had to admit that this cavalry unit was indeed very strong. They were even stronger than the Dao soldiers from Karaki Academy that he had encountered previously. This cavalry unit was filled with a murderous aura. They were unstoppable. That was the feeling they gave off. Very strong. Truly very strong. At this moment, all the soldiers of the state of Jiang had turned pale. Many of their eyes were filled with fear. At the sight of this, Jiang Jio's face instantly darkened. What was the most important thing for an army? It was the morale of the army. If they lost their morale before the battle began, they might collapse once the battle began. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly charged towards the Black Flame Army. At this moment, Yi Xian attracted everyone's attention. What is he doing? That was what everyone was thinking at this moment. Jiang Jio clenched her fists tightly as she stared at Yi Xian. Her mind was completely blank. Just like that, under countless gazes, Yi Xian's speed increased as he held the spirit elegant sword in his right hand. Battle intent. Torrential battle intent radiated from Yi Xian's body. Battle intent. Yi Xian's thoughts were very simple. He wanted to fight. Could he win? Couldn't win? He didn't think too much about it. Young people needed to be hot-blooded, to be aggressive, and to fight. If he couldn't win, he would run. Yi Xian's speed increased as his battle intent grew stronger. The Black Flame army in front of him didn't stop either. Not only did they not stop, but they also increased their speed. 1 person against 100. It was something that seemed impossible, but it was happening right now. Everyone was looking at Yi Xian, who was charging towards the Black Flame army. Under everyone's gazes, both sides were getting closer and closer. 10 zhang. 15 zhang. 10 zhang. Yi Xian suddenly leaped, and in the next moment he swung his sword at a Black Flame cavalryman. 1 sword to decide life and death. As the sword slashed down, a sword cry resounded. The Black Flame cavalryman stabbed with his spear. This stab didn't have any fancy movements and was extremely simple. The spear and sword collided. Bang! Beneath the 2 of them, the earth trembled, and the long spear in the hands of the Black Flame cavalryman instantly shattered. Yi Xian's sword slashed down in a straight line, directly on the head of the cavalryman. Bang! The cavalryman was instantly sent flying. This time he flew for more than 100 feet before finally crashing heavily onto the ground. After landing on the ground, he had just stood up when he instantly collapsed. Soon, blood flowed out from under his mask. Under the armor, the cavalryman's body had already cracked. However, the helmet was not destroyed. There was only a deep sword mark on it. After Yi Xian sent the cavalryman flying with his sword, he did not choose to continue fighting. Instead, after landing on the ground, he lightly pushed off with the tip of his foot and floated backwards. His speed was very fast, and in the blink of an eye he had already returned to the city wall. After a moment of silence, a series of furious roars suddenly burst out from Mizar City. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. State Scholar Yi. State Scholar Yi. Countless people roared in unison. At this moment, the morale of the soldiers of the state of Jiang, who had already fallen to rock bottom, instantly skyrocketed. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian, and her beautiful eyes were filled with splendor. Before this, if no one stood out, the state of Jiang could be said to have been defeated without a fight. Because before the battle even started, the morale of the soldiers of the state of Jiang was already completely gone. Under such circumstances, how could they fight? Fortunately, Yi Xian stood out. Yi Xian used his strength to tell all the soldiers of the state of Jiang that the Black Flame army was not that powerful. On the city wall, countless soldiers of the state of Jiang were in high spirits, and their eyes were filled with excitement. On the other hand, Yi Xian's expression was solemn. At this moment he already knew the strength of the Black Flame army. If it wasn't for the single sword determines life and death, he might not have been able to kill them. The strength of these people was secondary. The most important thing was their equipment. Their equipment was too good, and the helmet of the soldier of the Black Flame army had actually withstood his sword. After all, his sword was a real sword. If he had to put in so much effort to kill them, if the Black Flame army entered Mizar City, how could the soldiers of the state of Jiang defend Mizar City? They couldn't. Yi Xian slowly clenched the spirit-elegant sword in his right hand. Even if he had to expose his trump card, he couldn't let the soldiers of the state of Jiang face the Black Flame army. At this moment, not far from the city, Li Mu suddenly said, "Yi Xian, today is the day you die." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at the soldiers of the state of Chu. When the city is breached, you can do whatever you want after entering the city. Do whatever you want. Hearing this, countless soldiers of the state of Chu were instantly excited. This meant that after they entered the city they could do whatever they wanted. Li Mu suddenly turned to look at Mizar City. Attack. As soon as he finished speaking, countless soldiers of the state of Chu surged towards Mizar City like a tidal wave. At the same time, close to 30 ghostly figures in black suddenly appeared among the soldiers. Dark World Dao soldiers. On the city wall, Jiang Jiu took a step forward. Fight to the death. Fight to the death. On the city wall, countless soldiers roared in unison. The battle had begun. Countless arrows rained down like a torrential storm. Below the city wall there were more and more corpses. However, some of the state of Chu's High Sky Realm soldiers managed to ascend the city wall. Apart from them, there were also dozens of Dark World Dao soldiers. When these Dao soldiers charged up the city wall, the ordinary soldiers of the state of Jiang couldn't stop them. Even the death servants that the state of Jiang nurtured couldn't stop them. They weren't on the same level. Beside Yi Xian, Bai Zhe and Jianji had already charged out. Yi Xian didn't make a move. His attention was on the Black Flame army below. The Black Flame army hadn't made a move yet. At this moment, several figures charged towards the city gate of Mizar city. The speed of these figures was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye they arrived before the city gate. However, in the next moment, a ray of sword light appeared at the city gate. The few figures retreated at the same time. In front of the city gate, Yi Xian appeared out of nowhere. Not far away from him stood 3 black-robed figures. The 3 of them didn't choose to fight with Yi Xian. Instead they retreated. From Yi Xian's previous attack, they were very clear that ordinary people weren't a match for Yi Xian. They wouldn't make any unnecessary sacrifices. Yi Xian looked at Li Mu, who wasn't far away. Li Mu sneered and tilted his head. "It's your turn." As soon as Li Mu's voice fell, a woman suddenly walked out from the group of soldiers. The woman wore a long robe. If this chapter hasn't ended, please flip the page. She wore a long white dress that trailed the ground. There were 3 blood-red plum blossoms on it. In her hands she held an emerald-green pipa. The woman's appearance couldn't be considered to be devastatingly beautiful. However, she was very pleasing to the eye. She slowly walked towards Yi Xian. As she sized up Yi Xian, there was a trace of astonishment in her beautiful eyes. "Other than Enlancio, I never thought that there would be a genius like you in the Green Province. What a surprise." Yi Xian slowly walked towards the woman. "How about this? Do me a favor. If you leave, I'll return the favor in the future. What do you say?" The woman shook her head. She slowly walked towards Yi Xian. "They paid me 10 million supreme-grade spirit stones to restrain you. If I can kill you, it'll be 50 million. May I ask weakly, is your favor worth 50 million? Yi Xian shrugged his shoulders. "There's nothing to talk about." As soon as his voice fell, he disappeared from the spot. The woman's lips curled up. Her jade-like fingers lightly plucked the strings of the pipa. The sound of the pipa was like a sudden clap of thunder. Hundreds of soldiers who were closer to the woman instantly bled from their 7 orifices and fell to the ground. As for Yi Xian himself, he retreated to the city gates of Mizar city in an instant. Just as he stopped, fresh blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. The Lingxiu sword in his hand was also vibrating violently. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at the woman. The woman smiled gently. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Jiang Zhiga from the Heavenly Sound sect. In front of thousands of soldiers, I stopped them with my pipa. I'm currently ranked 11th on the demon ranking. However, I'll be in the top 10 soon." As she spoke, she smiled faintly. In the next instant, her jade-like fingers plucked the strings of the pipa. In an instant, a string sound reverberated. The string sound couldn't be seen. However, the ground in front of her started to crack inch by inch, all the way to the front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was expressionless. He tilted his head slightly and stabbed out with his sword. At the tip of the sword, a cold gleam appeared. Tiske. Yi Xian's body trembled violently. The ground beneath his feet started to crack inch by inch. Moreover, the cracks spread rapidly in all directions. In an instant, the city walls on both sides behind him had many cracks. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga suddenly took a step forward. She walked gracefully and her jade-like fingers plucked one of the strings of the pipa. In an instant, the crisp and melodious sound of the pipa rang out. The sound was pleasant to the ears. However, to Yi Xian it was undoubtedly a death sentence. He knew that he had met a true expert. At this moment he didn't dare to conceal his strength. He took a step forward and stabbed out with his sword. Boom! The string from before shattered instantly. Immediately after, he took another step forward and stabbed out with another arrow. The momentum of the sword was like a tsunami that was tens of thousands of feet high. It was unstoppable. Tiske. As the tip of Yi Xian's sword stabbed out, a sharp and ear-piercing tearing sound resounded. At this moment, his hand started to tremble violently. However, he destroyed the string sound. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga was stunned. It wasn't just her, even Li Mu was stunned. Sword Master? Li Mu's mind went blank and he stared blankly at Yi Xian. That strike just now had obviously reached the level of a sword master. Moreover, the sword intent was quite strange. Sword Master? Li Mu's right hand was trembling slightly. He looked at Yi Xian with eyes filled with disbelief. "You've actually reached the level of a sword master." Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, "I hid it on purpose to give you a surprise." "A surprise? Are you surprised?" Pooh. Li Mu suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. End of this chapter. Chapter 168. Surprise? It was more like shock. Li Mu had never imagined that Yi Xian had reached the level of a sword master. A sword master and a sword Dao grandmaster were two completely different concepts. A Sword Dao Grandmaster was popular in Azure Province, but in the Divine Central Continent, it was only above average. But a Sword Master was a completely different story. With Yi Xian's current strength, he was fully qualified to be on the demon-level geniuses list, and he could even make it to the top 10. Which one of the top 10 on the demon-level geniuses list wasn't a heaven-defying genius? Li Mu clenched his fist, shocked and furious. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga, who sat opposite Yi Xian, suddenly said softly, "Sword Master." As she spoke, she put away her pipa. "I think I can do you a favor." "Yi Xian," Jiang Zhiga sized up Yi Xian. "Remember, you owe me a favor. When you come to the Divine Central Continent in the future, remember to return the favor." With that, she turned to leave with her pipa in her arms. But when she passed by Li Mu, she suddenly stopped and glanced at him. "I'm a little embarrassed about this. Right, to express my apology, I'll take 9 million top-grade spirit stones from you. Pay up." As she spoke, she stretched out her right hand. Li Mu said angrily, "You're leaving and you still want money? What kind of logic is that?" Jiang Zhiga frowned slightly. "How arduous was my journey from the Divine Central Continent to here? I'm only asking you to pay for your labor. What, you're not willing?" Li Mu was furious. "You used the transportation array to come here. How arduous was it? The old man will tell you that if you want 10 million top-grade spirit stones, you can. Restrain him, and the old man will hand over the top-grade spirit stones with both hands. Otherwise—" Jiang Zhiga's eyes narrowed slightly. "Otherwise you'll hit me?" As she spoke, she took a step forward and looked straight at Li Mu. "What? You think you're so great because you're at a high level? Just try and touch me." Li Mu was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Did Jiang Zhiga? He really wanted to, but he couldn't. Jiang Zhiga was ranked 11th on the monster list. Most importantly, the Heavenly Sound sect behind her was a force that was much stronger than Karaki Academy. This fight was definitely poking a hornet's nest. Jiang Zhiga suddenly said indifferently, "Humph. It doesn't matter if you don't give it to me. I'll return to the Central Divine Prefecture right now and challenge Karaki Academy to a life-and-death battle." With that, she turned around and left. A challenge to the death. Li Mu's expression immediately changed. No one in Karaki Academy could beat this woman. If this woman went to Karaki Academy, she would be a complete bully. Most importantly, it was very likely that Karaki Academy would become enemies with the Heavenly Sound sect. Li Mu suddenly flicked his finger and a storage ring flew over to Jiang Zhiga. Jiang Zhiga stopped in her tracks and glanced at the storage ring. In the next moment, she put the storage ring away and turned around to smile at Li Mu. "Senior, it's been a pleasure working with you." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian. "Swordsman, remember, you owe me a favor, don't forget it." With that, she turned around and vanished swiftly into the distance. Yi Xian shook his head. "I've never seen such a shameless person." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. Three flying swords suddenly flew out from his body, and the heads of 3 Dark Dimension Dao soldiers on the city wall were instantly chopped off. Since he'd exposed his trump card, he naturally wouldn't suppress his strength. Li Mu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he roared furiously in the next moment, "Kill! Kill them all! Kill!" At this moment, he couldn't be bothered about all that. Yi Xian had attained the Sword Master realm. It was undoubtedly a bolt out of the blue to him and Karaki Academy. They absolutely couldn't allow Yi Xian to live. Because if Yi Xian headed to the Central Divine Prefecture, then with his current strength and natural talent, there would definitely be powers that would be willing to accept him, and there would definitely be quite a few of them. If a Grandmaster in the Sword Dao wasn't sufficient to make the powers of the Central Divine Prefecture become enemies with Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension, then a Sword Master was absolutely sufficient. If it was said that he was only afraid of Yi Xian in the past, then it wasn't just fear now, it was terror. The speed of Yi Xian's growth was truly too terrifying. As soon as Li Mu finished speaking, the soldiers of Chu in the surroundings charged forward, and even the cavalry had started charging. Yi Xian frowned when he saw the cavalry charge. The city gate hasn't been breached, yet the cavalry is charging? Right at this moment, the city gate of Mizar City exploded into pieces. It had come without the slightest sign. Everyone on the city wall was stunned. How did it break through? Jiang Jiao swiftly turned to look at Li Mu, who stood below the city wall. Li Mu's expression was calm while his eyes contained ghastly killing intent. It was he who'd attacked just now. On the city wall, Yi Xian faced Li Mu. He hadn't expected that Li Mu would actually attack. But Li Mu was an expert above the Dharma realm. Li Mu was taking a risk. Or it could be said that he was already driven to desperation. At this moment, 100,000 cavalry had already charged over. That battle array seemed as if they wanted to destroy the entire Mizar city. Yi Xian suddenly jumped off the city wall. He stood right in front of the city gate and felt the army charging over. Yi Xian's breathing stopped. The momentum of the army wasn't something that he could withstand with his current strength. If it was any other time he would turn around and run without hesitation. But now he couldn't run. Behind him was Jiangzhou Mo Yunqi by Zhe Azure Billow Academy, and thousands upon thousands of people of the state of Jiang. The responsibility on his shoulders was heavy. I can't retreat. The moment this thought appeared, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently. Immediately after, a surge of sword intent emitted from his body. Around Yi Xian's body, a white mist that resembled light smoke was emitted. It wasn't white mist, it was similar to white mist. Sword intent materialized. Seeing this scene, Li Mu, who was far away, was already completely stunned. Sword intent materialized. Wasn't this something that only the Sword Emperor could achieve? Sword Emperor? What's wrong with this world? Li Mu's mind went blank once again, as if he had been struck by lightning. Sword Emperor? In fact, Yi Xian hadn't reached the Sword Emperor level yet. Sword intent materialized was a manifestation of the Sword Emperor, but it didn't mean that he was definitely the Sword Emperor. To become the Sword Emperor, one's state of mind, Sword Dao attainment and understanding of the sword were all indispensable. But his current sword intent materialized had nothing to do with his realm or his Sword Dao attainment. This was the true nature of his sword intent, and it could be said that this was the uniqueness of his sword intent. Kindness sword intent. A kindness that could cross thousands of mountains and rivers. Kindness sword intent madly gathered around Yi Xian. The sword in his hand trembled violently, and waves of sword light rippled out. At this moment, his momentum had also reached an extremely terrifying level. Borrowing the momentum of the wind. Borrowing the momentum of the earth. At this moment, although Yi Xian was only at the Nether Passage realm, the momentum he emitted had already far surpassed the Nether Passage realm. No, it had even surpassed the Divine Unity realm and was approaching the Myriad Dharma realm. The cavalry had already arrived in front of the city gate. Yi Xian raised his head and faced the front. He took a step forward and without any fancy movements he just stabbed with his sword. When the sword struck, the momentum and intent around him instantly swept out along the spirit elegant sword. It was so strong that it was like a volcano that had been accumulating for countless years suddenly erupting. Its power was enough to destroy the heavens and earth. Boom. The dozens of cavalrymen in front of Yi Xian were instantly pulverized by this sword strike. The sword intent, which carried a terrifying and unparalleled momentum, flooded the remaining cavalrymen like a torrential downpour. Wherever it passed, countless cavalrymen from the Chu kingdom fell to the ground. In less than a breath's time, hundreds of cavalrymen had fallen in front of Yi Xian. The ground was filled with broken limbs and fresh blood. The power of a single sword was so terrifying. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. Was this something that a Nether Passage realm could do? Not to mention the others in the surroundings, even Yi Xian himself was stunned. Because he'd never imagined that his sword strike would actually be terrifying to such an extent. It should be said that he didn't expect his kind will sword intent to be so terrifying. Without thinking too much, he tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot and rushed out. A dozen or so Chu Kingdom cavalry instantly fell to the ground. But very quickly he retreated because the cavalry behind him was already charging at him. He couldn't kill them all. Yi Xian retreated to the city gate. The city gate was narrow and could only allow a dozen cavalry to enter at the same time. To him this was undoubtedly very advantageous. Just as Yi Xian retreated to the city gate, dozens of cavalry charged at him. Yi Xian swung his sword and a wave of sword light swept across. Swoosh! Dozens of cavalry fell from their horses in an instant. But in the next moment, dozens of cavalry stepped on countless corpses and rushed in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's eyes suddenly opened. Swoosh swoosh. Two rays of sword light shot out like lightning. Wherever they passed, dozens of Chu Kingdom cavalry were instantly cut in half at the waist. Fresh blood splattered on the ground. But in the next moment, another group of Chu Kingdom cavalry charged at him. At this time Yi Xian bent his finger and pointed forward. Two flying swords shot out from his arms. Swift shadow. The two swords flew through the battlefield silently and as fast as lightning. Everywhere they passed, heads fell to the ground and blood splattered everywhere. In an instant, the two flying swords killed dozens of cavalry. The ground was littered with corpses. But in the next moment, countless more Chu Kingdom cavalry charged in. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a sinister smile. His right foot pressed tightly against the ground. Endless power of the earth gathered towards his body. Activate the law of Tao. When the cavalry was still a few meters away from Yi Xian's right foot suddenly stomped on the ground and his entire body shot out like an arrow released from a bow. In front of Yi Xian, the leader of the Chu Kingdom cavalry, was instantly beheaded. Immediately after, the cavalry behind him fell to the ground. When Yi Xian appeared outside the city gates, dozens of cavalry behind him had already fallen. Hundreds of corpses were piled up outside the city gates. The cavalry could no longer continue their charge. Yi Xian pointed his long sword diagonally to the ground. On the spirit elegant sword, fresh blood was slowly dripping down the blade. In front of Yi Xian, the group of cavalry had already stopped. In their eyes there was fear. One man guarding the pass, 10,000 cannot get through. With Yi Xian guarding the city gates, who could break through? At this moment, a powerful force suddenly blasted against the city walls of Mizar City. In an instant, boom! The entire city walls of Mizar City collapsed. On the city walls, countless Jiang Kingdom soldiers fell to the ground. The city was breached. No, the city walls were breached. At this moment, there were no city walls in Mizar City. Below, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Mu. The one who attacked was Li Mu. Li Mu stared at Yi Xian. Can't you block it? Continue to block it for me? Yi Xian's right hand tightly gripped the sword in his hand. His entire body was emitting a ruthless aura. However, this aura was destroyed by his goodwill sword intent. From afar, Li Mu's mouth was full of a sinister smile. Continue to block it. As his voice fell, he waved his right hand. In an instant, 100,000 cavalry charged forward. How terrifying was it when 100,000 cavalry charged forward together? The earth trembled. At this moment, Mizar City no longer had any barriers. P.S. I'm really sorry recently. I haven't had any time to write. Today I used my phone to write 500 words in the car. My head is about to explode. I won't be naughty today. I'm really sorry. Also, I have a dream. I hope to become famous one day. If I become famous, I won't write anymore. I'll open a small shop and live the rest of my life in peace. But the problem is, when the hell will I become famous? This kind of thing that can't become popular, when will it end? Chapter 169. How could he block it? Yi Xian gripped the spirit elegant sword tightly in his right hand. At this moment he realized to his dismay that if an expert of Li Mu's level were to attack, he would not be able to resist at all. Although Li Mu did not attack him openly, the nature of the attack was the same. Mysterious woman? The first person he thought of was indeed the mysterious woman. Given the current situation, the mysterious woman could resolve it with a single sword strike. But on second thought, how could he rely on the mysterious woman for everything? At this moment, Jiangji Jiangjiu by Zhe Mo Yunqi, and countless Zhonglan Academy students and country of Jiang soldiers arrived behind Yi Xian. Looking at the countless Chu cavalrymen charging over from afar, Jiang Jiu and the rest did not show any fear. Jiang Jiu walked to Yi Xian and gently wiped the blood from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. She said gently, "You've done your best." "Done my best." Yi Xian was stunned. The next moment he smiled. "I've done my best." The future was unknown. All I had to do now was try my best. As for the outcome, there was no need to care too much. All I had to do was try my best. Yi Xian turned around to face the crowd. He said with a smile, "If we die here today, will you regret it?" Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "You could have escaped and died here with us. Will you regret it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "No." Jiang Jiu smiled. "I won't regret it either." "No regrets." Countless people roared in unison. "No regrets." Yi Xian laughed. "Although we were not born in the same year and month, we can die in the same year and month. But before we die, we have to drag someone down with us." With that, he pointed with his right hand. Two swords streaked across the battlefield. Dozens of feet away, the heads of over a dozen Chu cavalrymen fell to the ground. Fight to the death. Behind Yi Xian, countless people roared in unison. Right at this moment, there was a sudden change in the battlefield. Nearby, Li Mu suddenly turned to look into the distance. There was a group of cavalrymen galloping over. There were tens of thousands of them. The leader was actually a woman. Tuoba Yen, the king of Ning country. Li Mu was stunned. Where did the reinforcements come from? At this time, a Chu Empire cavalry general hurried over. Reporting. We have discovered a large number of Ning Empire cavalry on the right. They have come with ill intentions. Ning Kingdom's cavalry? Li Mu looked at the cavalry that was charging at him from afar. Soon his expression changed. Because this group of cavalry was charging towards them. Li Mu said ferociously, "What's wrong with Ningguo? Kill." In the distance Tuoba Yen roared. The Ning Kingdom's cavalry behind him sped up and charged into the Chu Kingdom's cavalry. Because they were charging from the side, the Chu cavalrymen had no time to defend, and their formation was immediately broken. The nearby Jiangjiu and the others were stunned when they saw this scene. Ning country will send troops to help? They were obviously still a little confused because they didn't expect that the Ning Kingdom would send troops to help at this time. Yi Xian was the first to come back to his senses. He raised his sword and pointed it into the distance. Kill? With that, he had already rushed out. Behind Yi Xian, countless soldiers of the state of Jiang and students of the Zhonglan Academy also rushed out. At this moment, it could be said that the Great Chu cavalry was being attacked from two sides. In the distance, Li Mu's complexion changed. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. It was extremely unsightly because he didn't expect that the Ning Kingdom would send troops to help at this time. Although the Great Cloud Empire's final plan was to destroy the Ning Kingdom, they had never provoked the Ning Kingdom until now. Seeing that the Chu cavalrymen were scattered, Li Mu immediately turned to look at the Black Flame army not far away. Attack! After a moment of silence, the Black Flame army suddenly rushed out at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they had already reached the two cavalrymen. Almost in an instant, the Ning Kingdom's cavalry was directly crushed. With the Black Flame army joining the battle, the situation of the Chu cavalrymen who were originally at a disadvantage was instantly reversed. Seeing this scene, Li Mu was a little shocked. The Black Flame army was too terrifying. This kind of army could even survive in the divine Central Continent. Not to mention these ordinary soldiers, even the Tao soldiers of the Karaki Academy might not be able to defeat this cavalry. In the distance, Tuoba Yen clearly noticed this as well. She immediately turned to look at Yi Xian who was in the crowd not far away. "Help me deal with the Black Flame army first." The Black Flame army. Upon hearing that, Yi Xian's figure trembled, and he directly went to Tuoba Yan's horse. He did not stand on ceremony and directly wrapped his arms around Tuoba Yan's soft waist. Tuoba Yan frowned slightly, her eyes glinting coldly. Just as she was about to flare up, Yi Xian suddenly said, "I'm not taking advantage of you. Come, let's charge over." As he spoke, his left hand gently tightened around Tuoba Yan's waist, and the two of them were even closer. Tuoba Yan tilted her head and coldly sliced at Yi Xian. In the next moment, she turned her horse around and charged toward the Black Flame army not far away. The two of them were getting closer and closer to the Black Flame army. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Be careful of the Dark World assassins." As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared from his horse. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the Black Flame army. He swung his sword. A Black Flame cavalryman in front of Yi Xian was sent flying by a single swing of his sword. The cavalryman flew over 30 m away and only stopped after knocking another Black Flame cavalryman into the air. After he crashed to the ground, he was unable to get up again. The Black Flame army was invincible in front of the ordinary soldiers of the Jiang Kingdom and Ning Kingdom. However, the Black Flame army was not invincible in front of Yi Xian, the sword master. A sword master would be able to do very well even in the Central Divine Continent, let alone in the land of Qingzhou. Especially a swordsman. A swordsman's combat strength was publicly acknowledged to be formidable. After Yi Xian sent a Black Flame soldier flying with a swing of his sword, a spear suddenly appeared behind him. There were no unnecessary movements in this spear. It was just an ordinary stab, but this stab was fast and powerful. Yi Xian turned around and stabbed with his sword, blocking the spear. At the same time, a swift shadow suddenly flew out and slashed at the Black Flame soldier in front of Yi Xian. However, when the swift shadow was about a dozen inches away from the cavalryman, a spear suddenly stabbed from the right. The spear was very fast and instantly stabbed the swift shadow sword. Bang! The swift shadow was instantly sent flying. At the same time, a spear had already arrived at the back of Yi Xian's head. Just as the spear was about to stab into the back of Yi Xian's head, a lightning bolt suddenly blasted the spear. Bang! The spear was sent flying. Tuoba Yen appeared behind Yi Xian. At this time, the surrounding Black Flame soldiers had already surrounded Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen. The Black Flame soldiers did not attack. Instead, they surrounded the two and ran quickly. They were so fast that Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen could only see their afterimages. Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen had their backs against each other. Both of their expressions were solemn. Even Yi Xian, who had already achieved the level of sword master, did not dare to underestimate these Black Flame Army soldiers. If this chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. He would not have any problems. But now there were more than 100 of them here. When these Black Flame soldiers grouped together, they were undoubtedly very terrifying. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically because nearly 100 arrows were shooting toward him and Tuoba Yen. Tuoba Yen's pupils shrank. These arrows were so dense that they could not dodge at all. Most importantly, these arrows were all bright Great Spirit weapons. They could pose a fatal threat to both of them. At this critical moment, Yi Xian suddenly pressed his right hand forward lightly. In an instant, a sword intent swept out from his body and formed a thick protective shield that enveloped him and Tuoba Yen. At the same time, 3 swords flew out from his body and flew around him and Tuoba Yen, shooting out bursts of sword light. Bang, 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 bang. In an instant, Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen were drowned by countless arrows. But in an instant, his sword intent became illusory, and the sword light around him was shattered in an instant. These arrows were too terrifying. Yi Xian suddenly turned to Tuoba Yen. I will split open a path. You rush out first. With that, he opened his palm and the Spirit Elegance sword flew into his hand. In the next moment he flicked his finger and the Spirit Elegance sword flew out. A single strike to decide life and death. As soon as the sword flew out, an ear-piercing sound of something tearing resounded. The sword in the lead of the Black Flame cavalryman was instantly pierced through the center of his forehead. At the same time, the powerful force contained within the sword blasted the cavalryman flying. This blasted him flying along with a few Black Flame cavalrymen. Yi Xian seized this opportunity to carry Tuoba Yen in his arms and charge out of the encirclement of the Black Flame cavalrymen. But in the next moment, they just stopped moving when over 100 arrows shot towards them from behind. Every single arrow actually flickered with the glow of an arrow. It was impossible to dodge. Tuoba Yan's pupils constricted. These Black Flame cavalrymen's attainments in the Tao of archery are actually so terrifying. I've still underestimated these Black Flame cavalrymen. This isn't something that anyone below the Dharma realm can resist. Suddenly Yi Xian pulled her behind him and took a step forward. He flicked his finger and then the 3 swords slashed forward. The 3 swords emanated dazzling rays of light that blasted many arrows away, but even more arrived in front of him and Tuoba Yen. Yi Xian took another step forward, and the kindness sword intent suddenly appeared in front of him. It condensed into a thick barrier of sword intent, but as soon as the arrows arrived, the barrier instantly became illusory. Moreover, blood even flowed from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Why aren't you leaving? Tuoba Yen gazed at Yi Xian in silence. Blood flowed incessantly from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth, and he roared furiously, Big sister, hurry up and leave. How the fuck am I supposed to escape if you don't leave? Tuoba Yen was speechless. Escape. Meanwhile, Li Mu suddenly appeared in the sky above the Black Flame cavalryman. He looked down at Yi Xian and ridiculed, Yi Xian, are you still thinking of escaping? Let me tell you, today is the day you die. The entire Jiang country and Ning country will be buried with you. With that, he waved his hand, and the Black Flame cavalryman charged directly at Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen. Yi Xian turned to look at Tuoba Yen. Can you give me a kiss before you die? The corners of Tuoba Yan's mouth twitched and she felt like hitting someone. Yi Xian suddenly leaned over and lightly tapped Tuoba Yan's lips. Tuoba Yan's body stiffened. Yi Xian immediately withdrew and leaned over to Tuoba Yan's ear, whispering, Where did you buy the medicine you brought last time? Tuoba Yen was speechless. End of this chapter. Chapter 170. Tuoba Yan's face darkened, and she stared fixedly at Yi Xian. If it wasn't for the special circumstances, she would have attacked a long time ago. Has this fellow gone mad? What time is it now? Meanwhile, the group of Black Flame cavalrymen had arrived. Yi Xian suddenly turned around, grinned, and then pressed his palms together before pulling them apart. In an instant, a box appeared in front of him. In the next moment, 12 rays of golden light flashed, and then 12 golden figures instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen. The 12 golden figures opened their eyes slowly, and then 12 rays of golden light instantly shot out from their eyes. Bang, 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 bang. Some of the Black Flame cavalrymen in the lead were blasted flying, and then 12 rays of golden light flashed again. Bang, 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 bang. As soon as the 12 golden figures charged forward, all the black flame cavalrymen were blasted flying. Li Mu was completely stunned by this scene. What the hell are those 12 golden figures? Why are they so terrifying? Meanwhile, Yi Xian's heart was bleeding because the 12 golden figures had instantly devoured over 1,000,000 supreme-grade spirit stones from him. All the supreme-grade spirit stones he'd saved up had vanished in an instant. I have to earn them back. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He pointed the exquisite sword at Li Mu, who was not far away, and grinned hideously. Watch carefully. As soon as he finished speaking, he loosened his grip, and Spirit Grace shot forward. The heads of over 10 cavalrymen instantly flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, Spirit Grace slashed horizontally towards the left, and blood sprayed as another 10+ cavalrymen were chopped into two at the waist. This wasn't the end of it. Yi Xian spread his hands apart, and 2 phantom swords suddenly flew out. A few dozen cavalrymen instantly fell to the ground over 30 m away from him, and blood flowed from the center of their brows. A slaughter. At this moment, the cavalrymen around Yi Xian retreated explosively, and their eyes were filled with terror as they gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked up at Li Mu and grinned. Is it nice? As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his fingers together and slashed towards the right. A ray of sword light slashed horizontally towards something that was over 60 m away. The foreheads of more than 10 Chu soldiers were instantly pierced through. Fresh blood splattered on the ground. In the air, Li Mu stared fixedly at, if this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Looking at Yi Xian, his right hand clenched tightly. Yi Xian opened his right hand and the spirit elegant sword returned to his hand. He looked into the distance. At this moment, the black flame cavalry had already calmed down. They had joined forces to surround the 12 golden men, but they couldn't do anything to them. Today the defense of the 12 golden men was simply too abnormal. For a time, the two sides formed a mutual restraint. Without the restraint of the black flame cavalrymen, Yi Xian was freed. Massacre. In a short period of less than an eighth of an hour, some of the high-ranking generals of the Chu kingdom's cavalry had been completely annihilated. The entire Chu people's heart was in chaos. At this moment, a loud and clear horn suddenly sounded from the distant horizon. When they heard the sound of the horn, the black flame cavalrymen stopped and started to retreat. Retreat. Seeing this, Li Mu's expression changed drastically. He suddenly turned to look at the horizon. Hold on. When the horn stopped, the black flame cavalrymen stopped as well. Li Mu turned to stare fixedly at Yi Xian as a violent aura radiated from his body. Yi Xian walked up to Li Mu and smiled. You want to do it yourself? Why don't you try? Li Mu stared at Yi Xian for a long time. In the end he grinned. If I don't kill you, I won't be able to rest easy. My Kuraki Academy won't be able to rest easy. With that, he slammed his palm down at Yi Xian. Seeing that Li Mu was really going to attack, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At this moment, Tuoba Yen, who had been silent all this while, suddenly appeared in front of him. Tuoba Yen suddenly pulled his hands together. In an instant, a black lightning shield emitting lightning appeared in front of him and Yi Xian. Boom. The shield in front of Tuoba Yen shattered. In the next moment, Tuoba Yen and Yi Xian were instantly blasted hundreds of meters away. In the end, both of them crashed heavily onto the ground, and the ground in an area of hundreds of meters cracked in an instant. On the ground, blood flowed from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. At this moment he felt like his entire body had shattered. As if he had thought of something, he hurriedly stood up and embraced Tuoba Yen. Blood flowed incessantly from Tuoba Yan's mouth, and it wasn't just his mouth, even his 7 apertures were bleeding. Yi Xian's mind went blank. Tuoba Yen, this chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Looking at Yi Xian, she seemed like she wanted to say something, but as soon as she opened her mouth, blood gushed out incessantly. Hugging Tuoba Yen tightly, Yi Xian gently wiped the corner of Tuoba Yan's mouth with his trembling right hand and said in a trembling voice, Why are you so stupid? That's an expert above the myriad Dharma realm. Tuoba Yen looked at Yi Xian. Blood was still flowing from her mouth, and the front of her chest was already dyed red. At the same time, her aura was also growing weaker and weaker. How terrifying was a strike from an expert above the myriad Dharma realm. Yi Xian hugged Tuoba Yen tightly, his body trembling incessantly. Looking at Yi Xian in such pain, a complicated look gradually appeared in Tuoba Yan's eyes. She slowly raised her left hand as if to touch Yi Xian's face, but just as she raised it, it fell back down again. At this moment, Jiang Jiu and Mo Yunqi and the others also came over. Looking at Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen on the ground, Jiang Jiu and the others were stunned. In the distance, Li Mu did not choose to continue after making his move. Instead, he looked around warily. He would never be able to forget the sword immortal dressed in a plain dress. When he made his move earlier, he was already prepared to die. But now, after making his move, he panicked a little. However, he discovered that after he made his move, the sword immortal did not appear. Even after half an hour, the sword immortal still did not appear. At this moment, Li Mu's body suddenly relaxed, and then he laughed maniacally. She didn't appear. Ha, she didn't appear. Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian in the distance with a crazed expression. So you've been faking it all along. Your master won't appear at all. You deceived me so badly. At this moment, Yi Xian gently placed Tuoba Yen on the ground and wiped the blood from the corner of Tuoba Yan's mouth. I'm sorry. Saying that, he slowly stood up and walked toward Li Mu, who was nearby. On the ground, Tuoba Yen stretched out her hand, but just as she raised it, it fell back down again. Then her eyes slowly closed. Yi Xian slowly walked toward Li Mu. He clenched his fists tightly and his expression was surprisingly calm. Li Mu grinned hideously. Want to kill me? Yi Xian slowly placed his right hand on his chest. After killing this person, I'll search for the second Tao law and release you out of the pagoda. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled violently. The next moment he opened his eyes abruptly. There were 2 eyeballs in his eyes. 2 dark blue eyeballs. End of this chapter. Chapter 171. The moment Yi Xian opened his eyes, his aura suddenly soared. In an instant, it was no weaker than Li Mu's aura. Feeling the aura on Yi Xian's body, Li Mu was stunned. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? He knew that there were some divine abilities and secret arts in the world that could temporarily increase a person's cultivation level. However, he had never seen anyone who could increase his cultivation level in an instant. From the Nether Passage realm to his level, this was a jump of 3 realms. This was simply impossible. But at this moment, Yi Xian really did it. On this day, Yi Xian had given him too many surprises. No, it was a shock. This time he was really shocked. Not far away, Yi Xian slowly walked towards Li Mu. With every step he took, the entire ground would tremble violently. At the same time, the aura around his body was still rising, becoming stronger and stronger, as if there was no end. Li Mu suddenly grinned. Above the Dharma realm? Impossible, I think you're just playing tricks. As his voice fell, he took a step forward and pointed at Yi Xian. As soon as he pointed, the space in front of Yi Xian suddenly shook violently. In the next moment, an illusory giant finger suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The giant finger contained a powerful force that instantly caused the space in front of Yi Xian to distort. At this time, Yi Xian's right hand suddenly bent inward, forming a claw. In the next moment he clawed forward. Bang! In an instant, the giant finger in front of Yi Xian instantly shattered. Li Mu's pupils shrank and he lost his voice. How is this possible? No, this is absolutely impossible. You can't reach above the Dharma realm. At this time, Yi Xian smiled coldly. This smile did not look like a human smile, and the surrounding soldiers felt their hair stand on end. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and with this step he disappeared on the spot. This was no longer speed but teleportation. Li Mu's expression changed drastically when he saw Yi Xian vanish. He took a step forward and smashed his fist forward, and this punch directly caused the space before him to tremble violently. The 10,000 Laws realm could distort all things to a certain extent. Above the 10,000 Laws realm, one could borrow the power of all things to a certain extent. At this moment he borrowed the power of space and the unique properties of space to strengthen his own strength. This realm was known as the Spell Manipulation Realm. Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws. Li Mu's punch was not a simple one. It could be said that it could directly destroy a city, however this punch was caught by Yi Xian's claw. Caught it. Seeing his fist being caught by Yi Xian's claw, Li Mu was stunned. At this moment, the power in his fist was also exploding, but it was forcibly blocked by Yi Xian's claw. Yi Xian suddenly clenched Li Mu's fist and twisted it. Crack! Li Mu's entire arm instantly shattered and blood splattered. Li Mu was shocked and was about to retreat, but at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pressed forward. Before Li Mu could react, Yi Xian's hand had grabbed Li Mu's throat. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian had already grabbed Li Mu's throat and appeared hundreds of feet away. As soon as they stopped, Yi Xin grabbed Li Mu's throat and pulled him down. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. The ground suddenly smashed. Bang! The ground shattered, and Li Mu's head directly sank into the ground. Yi Xin stepped towards Li Mu's head. Bang! Li Mu's head sunk even deeper, and his body and feet trembled violently on the ground. Yi Xin looked coldly at Li Mu on the ground. In the next moment he grabbed Li Mu's two legs and suddenly tore them apart. Crack! In an instant, Li Mu was directly torn into two halves. Seeing this scene, everyone present instantly felt their hair stand on end. A Dharma defensive realm expert was killed by Yi Xin just like that? Not far away, Yi Xin turned his head and looked around. The soldiers around him all retreated quickly, and some of them were so scared that their legs turned to jelly, and they couldn't even walk. Yi Xin suddenly raised his head and looked towards the horizon, and there was a trace of greed in his eyes. Freedom. It had been a long time since he had obtained freedom. Gradually he slowly closed his eyes. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly turned his head and looked at the group of black flame cavalrymen not far away. In the next moment he swung his claw. Bang! In the distance, the group of black flame cavalrymen instantly fell to the ground, and in an instant blood flowed out from their armor. Over 100 people were all dead. However, their armor and equipment were still intact. Yi Xin suddenly turned his head and looked at Tuoba Yen on the ground not far away. With a point of his finger, a ray of green light suddenly entered Tuoba Yan's body. In an instant, his body trembled violently, and in the next moment, an illusory figure suddenly shot into the sky. This illusory figure went straight into the clouds and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Yi Xin, on the other hand, was lying on the ground. His eyes were empty. Yi Xin slowly closed his eyes. The great god from the second floor had left. He had left with his Tao Law. However, he would return, because the Tao Law could only let him go out for a short period of time. His origin was still locked in the second floor. As long as his origin was still there, he would definitely return. However, he was still a little worried. Based on the great god's possession, this second floor god was really not a kind person. Not only was he not a kind person, but he was also a crazy and perverted fellow. This was because at a certain moment, he had already sensed the other party's killing intent towards him. Although he did not make a move in the end, it was definitely because of the mysterious woman and the world prison pagoda. Otherwise he would probably have died a few hundred times. This fellow would definitely cause a big trouble if he went out. Yi Xin shook his head and stopped thinking about the great god from the second floor who had already disappeared. He slowly got up. At this moment, Jiang Jiu hurriedly walked in front of him and supported him. Yi Xin said softly, "Go and chase after the remnants of the Chu Kingdom's army. Leave this to me." When the Black Flame cavalry was completely annihilated, the Chu Kingdom's cavalry had already begun to flee. The Dark World had also instantly disappeared without a trace. Yi Xin was a little weak. This time the Chu Kingdom's cavalry suffered a heavy blow and fled like startled birds. To our Jiang Kingdom, this is undoubtedly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If we don't seize the opportunity to chase after them and annihilate their main force, we'll be in trouble when they regroup. Don't lose this opportunity. Go, I'll be fine. Jiang Jiu nodded. Be careful. With that she turned and left. Before long Jiang Jiu gathered all the soldiers who were still capable of fighting and chased after Tuoba Yen. Yi Xin walked slowly to Tuoba Yen. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Although Tuoba Yen looked very miserable at this moment, his aura was still present. This was the reason why he gave the Tao Law to the great god from the second floor. He had to save Tuoba Yen. Then he would give the Tao Law to him and let him leave. If he didn't agree, the great god from the second floor would never leave the world prison pagoda because the Tao Law could suppress him and prevent him from leaving the pagoda. On the other hand, giving the Tao Law to the great god from the second floor was more dangerous for him. If that fellow didn't return and couldn't bring back the Tao Law, then he would definitely be beaten up by the mysterious woman. Yi Xin stopped thinking about the great god from the second floor who had disappeared to God knows where. He squatted down slowly before Tuoba Yen and looked at the woman before him with rather complicated feelings in his heart. If Tuoba Yen hadn't utilized that lightning shield earlier, he might have been killed by Li Mu with a single strike. Li Mu. Kuraki Academy. Yi Xin clenched his right hand tightly. He'd underestimated Kuraki Academy's determination. The stronger the strength he displayed, the more Kuraki Academy would think of ways to kill him. The conflict between him and Kuraki Academy would never rest until one side was dead. Meanwhile, Tuoba Yan's right hand trembled slightly, and Yi Xian hurriedly carried her. Tuoba Yin slowly opened her eyes, and she was instantly stunned when she saw Yi Xian. "You're dead as well?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes, I'm here to accompany you." Tuoba Yin was stunned, and then she said, "Why are you so silly?" At this point, she suddenly turned around and looked at Yi Xian with rage in her beautiful eyes. "Do you want to die?" Yi Xian chuckled. "It feels good to joke with you." Tuoba Yin glanced at Yi Xian. "Why am I not dead?" Yi Xian said, "A senior acted." As he spoke, he paused for a moment and asked, "Why did you stand in front of me just now? You could have died." Tuoba Yin spoke indifferently, "If I knew I would die, I wouldn't have done that." Hearing this, Yi Xian's body stiffened. In an instant, his heart was filled with mixed feelings, disappointment, self-mockery. After a moment, he smiled awkwardly. "Oh." Tuoba Yin glanced at Yi Xian. She struggled free of Yi Xian's hand and stood up with difficulty. After that, she walked away expressionlessly. It didn't take long for Tuoba Yin to leave with the remaining Ning Kingdom cavalry. At this moment, Mo Yunqi suddenly limped over to Yi Xian, and he lightly nudged the dazed Yi Xian with his right hand. "Bandit Yi, are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid?" Yi Xian looked at Mo Yunqi with a puzzled expression. Mo Yunqi shook his head. "Bandit Yi, they came all the way here to help. Who is it for? Is it the Jiang Kingdom? If it weren't for you, the Ning Kingdom would not have come to help the Jiang Kingdom. Moreover, there's something fishy going on between the two of you. I'm sure that Lord Tuoba came for you." As he spoke, he sighed softly. "As for your previous question, please think about it carefully. It's a Dharma-controlling realm expert. With Lord Tuoba's wisdom, how could he not know how terrifying Li Mu is? She stood in front of you and prepared for the worst." Yi Xian was stunned. After a moment, he suddenly kicked Mo Yunqi's butt. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" With that, he disappeared into the distance. On the ground not far away, Mo Yunqi lay on the ground, hugging his butt tightly and wailing. "You didn't ask." P.S. End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.